I just can't really explain why for thousands of years on every continent where there's been people living at some point, whether it's in North Africa, the Middle East, whether it's in Europe, whether it's now in the Americas, at some point, the people come together and agree, yeah, you know what? The Jews are the problem. They did it in Ethiopia. They did it in Poland, right? It didn't matter if they were black Jews, white Jews. It didn't matter at all. It didn't matter what their skin complexion was. It didn't matter from where they thought they hailed. They called them Falasha in Ethiopia, which means outsider. Some people who try to defend the Ethiopian, the Israel's racist, and they call them Falasha. I said, you idiot. If you even knew what you were saying, you wouldn't call them Falasha. Their enemies called them Falasha, meaning you're not from here. You might look like me, but you're not from here. You're from somewhere else. Why was that so universal for thousands of years?
Welcome back to the Common Denominator. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. I'm joined today with Pastor Dumisani Washington, and I could not be more delighted to be sitting with him to discuss the extraordinary times that we're living in. Dumisani Washington is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, IBSI, and the former Diversity Outreach Coordinator for the over 10 million member Christians United for Israel, CUFI. Dumisani is a pastor, professional musician. He's a graduate of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, an author whose latest book is the second edition of Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. He and his wife, Valerie, have been married for 35 years and have 6 children and 3 grandchildren. Welcome, Dumisani, at last we meet.
Ilana, great to be with you today. I apologize for my little craziness on today, all that stuff going on, but I'm glad to be with you on today.
Well, you're in good company when it comes to dealing with the craziness. I want to say, really on a personal note, that I feel that we're old friends, quite frankly, for at least 2 reasons. And one is that at least since it was around 2018, when there were terrorists on a stabbing spree attacking people countrywide, it was then when I first heard your clear voice and moral compass that was demonstrated for everyone in support of the madness that Israelis had to endure. And what's so tremendous about that is that your voice hasn't wavered. It hasn't weakened. It hasn't grown tired of standing in defense of these truths. And that's no small feat in our throwaway world. I really want to thank you personally. And on behalf of the Jewish people and the Israeli people, it means a great deal. Secondly, I grew up in the America of the 70s and 80s, the one where I got to be friends with everyone and hang out with everyone, where there were still binary realities that supported the ground underneath us. The people were essentially good. They wanted to get along where they could and have a healthy argument and sort of get on with it, if not. Right. And when I hear you speak, it's reminded of that America that I was raised in, that I believed in, and that I dearly loved. And it brings up that hope of coming to a modern version of it once again today. So happy that you're here. And let's just first start off. Dumisani Washington, how did you find yourself in possession of such radical ideas that Jews shouldn't be persecuted? Tell me about the world that you grow up in, and how have you landed in this, and thank God, leadership role?
Well, it's funny. You mentioned one of the things you mentioned was growing up. I'm a product of the late 60s, 70s. I was born in the late 60s, as was my wife. Grew up in California, probably the most multi-ethnic state in all of the Union, right? My friends are all different ethnicities, including Southeast Asian. It's funny, after the Vietnam War, many of the Vietnamese who had to leave their countries came to the States. And there were certain places that they came. And one of those was the Stockton, California area and everything. The only reason I mentioned that, Ilana, is because whether they were Hispanic, whether they were Black, white, some African immigrants, and I grew up with everybody, right? And so for what you were saying about me in my voice, that type of thing, it's what's interesting to me, and I've heard other people say this, we are living in such extraordinarily distorted times that someone just saying something that's pragmatic or true, they get a lot of attention, good or bad, right? And it's kind of sad in that sense, because things like Jews have a right to defend themselves should not be controversial like anybody else. Insert any other ethnic group or even religious group. And sure, Catholics have the right to defend themselves, Hispanics have the right to, but somehow it's controversial when it's Jews, when it's Israel. And that's more of a commentary of where we are today, right? I was raised very proud of my African American heritage, and not in a militant sense at all. My parents, my family is from Little Rock, Arkansas. Though I grew up in California, I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and my parents endured the segregated South. Right? My dad's dad was a sharecropper. I tell some stories, several anecdotes in my book Zionism in the Black Church about that, um, about my mom's experience, the families that integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. We knew those families. My mom did. My mom and dad. I'm the youngest of 7 children. I'm a throwback in that sense. My wife and I had 6 children, right? So the people would always kind of look at us weird in the 90s. Here we are, traveling around, looking like this, Chabad family, right? So other people just, and they would look at us strange, and I didn't really, because that's how I grew up. It wasn't an issue for me. I recognized that it was different in my era as coming up, but I didn't really. It didn't make any difference to me. So being proud of my African American heritage, Ileana, hearing Israel slandered as an apartheid state, Zionism being racism, all that nonsense. Not only are those things not true on their face, it's just not true, right? But they are actually a complete dismissal and maybe even denigration of those who went through apartheid, those who went through Jim Crow, all of those things, right? So this is part of where we are here today. It is a battle like never before for truth, for clarity. And so our voices at the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel are one of, we see as a collective of those telling the truth, maybe from different perspectives. We have different emphases and that type of thing. But it really is about truth, about facts, about education. That is the bedrock of what we do, whether we're with Black pastors, Black community leaders, whether throughout the country, whether we're traveling to Israel, whether we're traveling to Africa. We are working with and always want to emphasize what is true. Was it Isaiah, the prophet, who said, woe be unto those who call evil good and good evil, right? We are living in those times, right? Evil is good, good is evil. The world is upside down. And the people who are suffering, obviously, we're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a broader sense. It's our children. Children are being, I couldn't imagine raising children now. Don't get me wrong. Children are an inheritance from the Lord. I'm not doing that whole route. People shouldn't have kids. Of course they should, because children are a blessing from God. My heart goes out to young parents. I often will tweet out to or say something to like dear young parents, right? To just give a little bit of advice here and there, because in a world in which truth is now relative, where, like, again, evil is good, good is evil, up is down, down is up, and kids are the ones who are so victimized by that, because their hearts, their minds, their souls are still being formed, right? And those things happen in a formative. This is a long introduction. Let me say this real quick for everyone
No,
who may know
keep going.
something about me. My wife and I are a few months apart, right? We were both born in the 60s. I was born in February 67. She was born in September 66. I was told I'm the younger one in the family, in the marriage, right? So she got a younger man by like, what, 5-6 months. She became a Zionist. I've shared this story before, at around 7-8 years old, which was probably around the Yom Kippur War. And the reason I'm estimating is for this: her grandfather was a Baptist pastor, preacher, who very much in a Black American tradition was very much a Philo-Semite, was very much identified in terms of like we said, the Negro spirituals, go down Moses, all these connections when it came to the Black community, but also in the geopolitical sense. She remembers to this day, Ileana, being a little girl playing in the house at her grandparents' house, and in the kitchen, the adults were there, her grandfather, her parents, some of her aunts and uncles, and they were having a very lively discussion, as they always did. They're like my family, we're loud. Our Israelis and Black people are the same. We loud, and we
So
make
loud.
like this with hands and okay. So yes,
Oh,
at
yes.
some point she's going through the kitchen because the kids are playing, right? The kids are doing their thing, and he says to them, what, 50 something years ago now, We must stand with Israel. The day America comes against Israel, we are lost. We are doomed as a nation. That's her grandfather in the 1970s, right? She loved and adored Gramps so much that when he said it, boom. Why? Because he said it. He said we must stand with Israel. Here she is, 57 years old now. And the foundation of her understanding, of course, she understands now. She understands it scripturally better now than she did, obviously, as a little kid. She understands the geopolitical things. She understands who the PLO is, all of those things. But the foundation for that belief and understanding started as a child when her grandfather said, we must stand with Israel. Why am I saying that now? These kids are hearing all kinds of stuff from elementary school. Israel's an apartheid state, lie. Israel's committing genocide, lie. And you're 5, 6, 7 years old. First of all, you should be learning to read and write. Our illiteracy rates in the United States of America are through the roof, right? So not only are we not teaching them how to read, how to write, we're teaching them, terrorist propaganda, right? We're teaching them, here's, like you said, here's this thing, there's an oppressed and oppressors, and the Israelis are white, not true, and the Palestinians are brown, not true. All these kind of generic, these kids are learning this from grade school. So by the time they get to college, they've already been pretty much indoctrinated. These are the things that drive our passion, Ilana, to tell the truth and to make sure our young people are hearing it.
It's interesting. I was thinking when you were just saying that here we've made what's biological fact relative, but we've made what actually is relative as if it were biological fact. So suddenly all of the complexities of the Middle East and, this ancient Jewish people and on and on and on, that's just, it's brown and white. It's oppressor and oppressed, but yet male and female. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think that as much as people are tearing each other apart, grown-up people, it's no greater offense than what's happening to our children. Very much specifically what's happening to the children inside Gaza. If you know anything about, I know that you do, but anything about the UNRWA education system, I have said it 100 times and I will say it 100 more. The definition of childhood to me is freedom from the knowledge of the world of sexuality and of violence. And they are being born and bred on that. And that's exactly, and certainly we know in states about the sexualization of children. That's for the next time we meet, perhaps. But this is a war on children. And as you started saying, we're a species.
Yes.
The continuation of your species is reliant on your children. So first and foremost, and I'm happy that's the basis of the entirety of my work. And I think, and it's interesting, you talk about Valerie, your wife's grandfather, and I always wonder, because I have felt, you start talking about the anti-Semitism, you talk about the vile inversion and the deliberate attack on truth. So what makes, and there's been times in this last libel with the several dozen people, was it with 35 or 45 people who were killed in Rafah last week, and of course the news ran with it and waited 3 hours later to find out, whoops, but of course it wasn't a whoops, it was a very intentional, Hamas did it. So with that last libel, there's been times where I'm fully devoted to fighting this fight, and sometimes the din is so it's such a tight web that I feel like I can't meet it with anything but silence. And that's actually when your voice, yours specifically, and also a couple others that we spoke with, that you guys take the ball, because I don't even know, you have to go so far back to set the record straight when you want to talk about Jews, when you want to talk Jews in Israel. And at some point, I don't even know, it's like a sheer wall. There's no groove to get my toe in to try to climb up and to get to a place of, at least here on this little space, we can talk truth. So it always makes me wonder when I think of again, what your wife's grandfather, what makes a person able to, across the world, plug right into that same truth exactly as I see it, because this is.
Yes, ma'am. I know it's a fascinating observation. You're on point. these are spiritual principles, right? As we know, as we are spiritual beings first, and then we're physical, right? Our as our Jewish friends say, our neshama will live on, right? So the Bible says the body will decay, it'll go return to the ground, but who the essence of who we are lives on, right? And to me, that essence represents what's true, no matter what's going on culturally, what's going on, all kinds of fads and trends and everything. History has shown us that God is a God of truth, right? He's got love, compassion, all those things, but that love and compassion does not obfuscate truth, right? Just like a good parent that's not going to lie to their child because they love them. They're ultimately going to tell them the truth as the child can receive it, right? You can't say something to a 5-year-old that you can say to a 15-year-old, but still, you're not going to just blatantly lie. You're going to try to build precept upon precept for that child so that that child can embrace truth, because anything else is bondage, right? It's mental, spiritual bondage, right? So what we find is that it's interesting that that truth will come from sometimes the strangest of places. This eighth eighth grader over here who writes a paper and they say something that's true and blows everybody away, or some wife and some husband, whatever. It's not always those superheroes that we think in our minds, right? But it's somebody who's willing to stand up and go, hey, actually, that's not right. Here's what's actually true. One of the things I've noticed, I have different Muslim friends or colleagues throughout, both in the States and in the UK, who risk their lives, who actually defend Israel, but know their families have either excommunicated them or even they're getting death threats from otherwise, right? Because they are compelled to say, hey, actually, Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. Actually, we don't have any right to try to dislodge them and kill them. Like, what are you saying? What do you say? But because they are compelled to do it. I believe that's a spiritual thing. I believe that God will place it on people's hearts. And what's say? I guess it's Proverbs. The heart of the king is in God's hands, and like the rivers of water, He's able to turn it. God will ultimately declare truth through vessels that are willing. And Ilana, the scripture teaches even they're not willing, right? Balaam, the one who's supposed to curse the children of Israel, he didn't want to bless them, right? He wanted his money. He wanted his payday, right? He would get up, he'd get ready to curse, and then boom, a blessing. Some of the most beautiful blessings on the children of Israel came from this wicked prophet, right? Why? Because God's the one that's in control. For me, that's a reminder of it, right? That we and people like yourself don't say what's true just when it's convenient, right? But even when it's going to cost you something. And I believe it's an indication of two things. One, that person's commitment to God. And if they're not a religious person, at least a commitment to the principle of what's true. But also, it's often a commitment to the people, right? I used to say as a pastor, we would say this each time, that as pastors, even when we have difficult sermons, I would tell the people, I love you enough to tell you the truth, right? What I'm getting ready to say right here in this part of my message is going to piss most of you off in the room. I get that. Please understand, I'm not trying to piss you off. I'm not trying to lob a grenade out there, metaphorically speaking, right? I'm not trying to shake things up and be controversial. No, I have no desire for that. I like my life. I love my wife, love my kids. I don't need controversy. I'm a homebody, all the kind. I'm not looking for attention. But please know that as your pastor, as I'm getting ready to say XYZ, it's because I love you, not the opposite, right? I know that you need to hear this, right? So not in arrogance, not in vanity, like I'm the man and somehow I know everything, you don't anything know, but I do have a responsibility on this pulpit. I do have a responsibility on this microphone as a husband, as a father, as a community leader, to not, as we say, where I've come from, not shuck and jive, not sit there and buck dance and none of that kind of stuff, right? I'm going to tell you, yes, I'm going to be called these names. I don't care. My skin is thick enough. God's been good to me. All that social media stuff, I couldn't care less. I don't know who that person is, and I love my life, right? So a lot of that bitterness, as you know, Ilana, a lot of that hatred for Israel, just haters, right? Hey, here's this tiny nation, what, 9 million people, right? Doing amazing things all over the world, life-saving technology, you name it. Sometimes an old-fashioned hater is just a hater, right? How dare you Jews go and rebuild your homeland and affect positively impact the nations around the world? Some people are just angry about that, and they are more susceptible to the lies that are being told about the Jewish people. So I think that the truth part of it is something that someone at some point is committed to, right? They are, you know this, Ilana, and you and I have been watching this particular after October 7th. There are some voices who previously were silent, but after they saw enough, They said, you know what? I can't anymore. I cannot do this anymore. Let me interject this real quick. You talked about kids, the sexualization of kids, all which is the worst. What does it say? I believe in Song of Solomon, do not awake love before it's time, right? These kids who are 4, 5, 6 being lied about their gender, some of them later on, 12, 13, 14, being taken to surgeons, and just the most unspeakable fires of Molech, right? This is the definition of putting your kids in fire, right?
A hundred.
Yes, we're
Child
lying. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
2024 is child sacrifice. It
Yes, ma'am.
absolutely is.
Yes, ma'am. We are living in this time, and what happened was, just quick. People can Google if they want to. Susan Eggman. I'm from California. I live in North Carolina now. Susan Eggman is not a city council. She's a Congress representative in the state of California, right? She just got up on the floor last week, and she's a progressive Democrat. She has been largely silent on a lot of the negative things we're just talking about right now. She just got up, Ilana. Now, this is about truth, right? And she made a speech, maybe about 2-3 minutes, right? And she basically said, I'm going to summarize it. I can't do this anymore. I'm not covering for pedophiles. I'm not covering for sex trafficking. Now, again, what horrified me, as I told people, is that what she's saying is that she has been silent, right? That's bad, right? But she got up last week and said, can't do this anymore, right? She said, yes, I'm concerned about the prison industrial complex. Yes, I'm concerned about just locking anybody up. But at the same time, these people need to be locked up. And I was like, well, here's where we are right now. She's saying, I've gone along to get along. I've been silent. I've seen heinous things where these children are concerned. We know about where they're being trafficked, what's happening with them. She says, I can't do it anymore. Again, bad news is that she did it in the first place. The good news is that she's standing up, knowing she's going to get the ire of her colleagues. I think she's retiring as well, right? She's almost saying, on my way out the door, what is she saying? Let me tell the truth. Regardless to what I did and whatever I allowed to happen before, on my way out of this Congress hall, let me tell you, here's the truth. These children are being abused. They're being trafficked, and I refuse to be silent. I believe that's much of what's happening right now in our world. There are people who are standing up, who are saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I need to tell the truth.
Yeah. And thank God. And it's probably the main thing that gives me hope, because certainly we're there. We are officially there. You have, what I feel is that, like you said, you have people understanding that we're in the red on every single topic across the board. And here are the Jews telling people it's getting mightily Third Reich up in here. And people are saying, shut up, Jew. And that's literally what's happening. And what's so incredible is you have some of the most intelligent and articulate people fully embracing the inversion. And just as the other side, it doesn't, I mean, God forbid, we should never know, but it doesn't take many terrorists to terrorize a nation. So by that same standard, God doesn't create, there's no place where there's good without evil and where there's evil without good. So I 100% believe that the more people who align themselves with their integrity, with their human empathy, with the truth that is bigger than both of us, then there is hope. Because what I see today, as I have said many times, the reason that we are in such tremendous sakana, such tremendous danger, is because today this affects us all. This isn't some shtetl in Poland. This isn't a war that's even just as it were between Ukraine and Russia. This is all of us. You have people who have never even, again, it's a cliche by now, they got no idea which river and which sea, but they have an opinion about the Jews and what's happening. And so because it's so terrifying is why I actually have some hope, because that shows me something different. Maybe something different. Maybe we have an opportunity to loop out of this historical spiral and maybe finally learn. That's the beauty of the internet. All this information at our at our fingertips, and yet we're doing this old, everything old is new again,
Right.
right? Candace
Right.
Owens discovered that there's a fantastic, it's a very lucrative business being anti-Jewish, right? So
Yes.
but that's my hope of what's new.
Right.
That's the hope there, is that somehow we could do it differently.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right. I think that because, and staying on this spiritual theme for a moment, you were mentioning that there's some very otherwise intelligent people who are spouting off the lies. Historians, Thomas Sowell, other ones have said that the most unlikely place for the Nazi party and the destruction of Jews to happen was Germany. In terms of historically, they were so uh, sophisticated, so intelligent, so advanced, right? So the historians would say you would not have thought, of course, that's exactly what happened, right? But you would not have associated that. Of course, Russia, the pogroms, those types of things, that they were talking about Germany, how it actually had distinguished itself as this Western European nation that was so enlightened, right? That was so, there was no way it was going to descend into the barbarism that it did. But look at what happened, right? This is what's exactly going on in the West. This was actually going on in the United States of America, right? Unfortunately, what we're seeing is sometimes, as you said, even very smart people pulled in. And it's always a reminder to me that the word of God says that the fear of Hashem, the fear of God, is the beginning of wisdom, right? There is human smarts, which is a good thing, right? But then there's this godly wisdom that's a very, very different thing, right? Pharaoh thought he was pretty smart. He thought he was the smartest person. Well, the sun literally rose and sat on him. But he opposed the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the stupidest thing that you could do, right? So he takes all of his intelligence, all of his ability, and he tells Moshe, I don't know your God. I don't know what you're talking about. So forget you. I'm going to come against, right? Plague after plague after plague. And what does it show us as Gentiles watching it, right? It goes, it's that, you know what? It would have been better for Pharaoh to acknowledge that God that Moses was talking about, maybe after the second or third plague. No, he doubles down over and over and over again, right? It reminds us that intelligence is not a panacea for stupid ideas, for a foolish mind, right? So what we're seeing here is people who are otherwise educated, otherwise enlightened, otherwise erudite. They're cool until the subject of Jews comes up. Then they lose it. They go completely bonkers, right? And this otherwise rational person, you're listening to them going, how did you become the Grand Mufti just so quick? Wait, you went from this to Hitler, but it makes sense to them and all the other people that are kind of listening to them. To me, it is more evidence that this is not just intellectual, it's also spiritual, right? There's a spiritual element that's here that people who don't understand that, if you don't understand the spiritual warfare aspect of hatred for Israel, and this is what for all those who are listening to this, especially if you're an atheist, and I don't come against people for their beliefs. They have to believe what they believe, but I also am not going to stop what I believe. The Bible says the fool has said in his heart there is no God, right? So if you then don't understand that there's a spiritual, almost invisible element to this hatred for Israel, because some people, they'll ask me, even they're not religious, Ilana, they'll go, Pastor Dumisani, I don't understand, because maybe they don't have a dog in the fight, right? They're just kind of watching, right? They're going, why does everybody hate the Jews? I don't understand that. And I always have to pause and go, you may not be a spiritual person. You may not be a person who reads the Bible, but I cannot answer that question. I can answer it geopolitically. I can answer it in terms of history. But my first answer is that there is a spiritual reality to hatred for Israel and the Jewish people. There's hatred for God. Psalm 83, Psalm 2. You keep going and going. There's a connection that's there that I sometimes will still share with people, even though they may not share my religious beliefs. Doesn't matter, right? You don't have to believe that the God of Abraham is the God of Abraham. You still need to understand this principle.
So would you say, because I completely agree, there's something that's it's an actual insanity. You see it. You as you said, as each of us listening has heard, somebody just, it's that whoops, it's like that Pez doll, all of a sudden it just collapses, right? It's a real insanity. And also actually anti-Semitism is really the root of all conspiracy theory. You're talking about the people who brought the idea of commandedness, right? We brought responsibility, brought this to the earth. We're a drag, and it's exactly us who takes all the accountability. What would you say that this whoops that happens in people's brain you feel like it's a disconnection from that shared reality, from that X and Y chromosome, the very clarity. Would you say it's a mismatch? They're not fully in touch with God? Is that what we're?
It's what's funny is that the biblical principle that is laid out in terms of God's relationship with Israel, right? And I'm not saying this as someone who's trying to teach Jewish people the Torah. They know the Torah. That's not what I'm doing. I'm talking about the principles as a Christian pastor. What's amazing is that God tells Israel, here's the Torah, here's my covenant with you, right? And I'm commissioning you now to be kings and priests to the nations, right? In the Christian Bible, the apostle Peter actually quotes that scripture when he's talking about you've been called to be a royal priesthood, a holy nation. In other words, he's talking about our communal responsibility as people of the book to actually reflect this to the world, right? So God, here's the 12 tribes. The Levitical tribe is the priestly tribe, but God says, but actually you're all my priests, all of you, right? Yeah. So technically you are all to reflect this to everyone. Of course the world's going to hate that. What one of the most gripping scenes in the movie, oh boy, I can't remember, Daniel Craig, World War II, Defiance. If you've ever seen that movie, Defiance, based on the true story of these brothers who lead the Jewish people during in the forest, I believe it's of Germany, for like a couple of years, avoiding the Nazis, right? They actually are successful in shielding a group of people going from place to place, living out there like the Maccabees, basically, right? And at some point in the scene, I don't know how true this is to life, but in the scene in the movie, there's a rabbi who's actually, I don't know if it's a high holy day, something that they're acknowledging together out there in the forest, right? And he's praying to God. And one of the things that he says at some point, Ilana, is, and God, one more thing, please take back your holiness. My wife and I sat there. And what he was saying was that you commissioned us to be your representatives. We don't want it.
Yeah.
It was a powerful moment. Was he being literal? I mean, it was the scene was speaking to the weight on the shoulders of our Jewish people. God says to the Jewish people, hey, I want you to tell everybody that there's one God, and I want you to reflect this. And so it's like him sending a prophet, right? Him sending a speaker, and the people not wanting to hear it, right? Even for those who don't understand it religiously, the part that they can't name, right? Those sometimes non-religious people, they're going, but they can't put their finger on. Yeah, I reject all that stuff that pastor's spouting off, but I just can't really explain why for thousands of years on every continent where there's been people living at some point, whether it's in North Africa, the Middle East, whether it's in Europe, whether it's now in the Americas, at some point, the people come together and agree, yeah, you know what? The Jews are the problem. They did it in Ethiopia. They did it in Poland, right? It didn't matter if they were black Jews, white Jews. It didn't matter at all. It didn't matter what their skin complexion was. It didn't matter from where they thought they hailed. They called them Falasha in Ethiopia, which means outsider. Some people who try to defend the Ethiopian, the Israel's racist, and they call them Falasha. I said, you idiot. If you even knew what you were saying, you wouldn't call them Falasha. Their enemies called them Falasha, meaning you're not from here. You might look like me, but you're not from here. You're from somewhere else. Why was that so universal for thousands of years? There's the spiritual reasons as to why. This hatred for Israel is hatred for God. Whether people realize it or not, that's exactly what's playing out.
It's so true, because ultimately, it makes no sense that there's still a Jewish people, a thriving Jewish people with a nation. It makes no sense. We should have been, God forbid, long gone. We are proof of God. The existence of Jesus is proof of God.
I hate to cut you off here. Just one last thing. I'm sorry. So when you talk about the original conspiracy theory, the whole issue in Exodus is that Pharaoh makes up a conspiracy. These people might come against us. There's too many of them. Oh my God. Nothing that happened. Nowhere in the scriptures where there's some sort of plot and plan. There are no Hebrews trying to overthrow Pharaoh's government. None of that stuff. He just says, you know what? A, there's too many of them. B, they might come against us. Let's enslave them. Let's throw their babies in the Nile, right? This is the original, the Jews, right? The Hebrews had not done anything. As a matter of fact, the narrative starts off by saying there's a new Pharaoh who says, we know this truth, who knew not Joseph. No, they chose to not remember Joseph, who was the Hebrew, who saved all of them, right? They decided, not only are we not going to treat these people kindly because of the patriarch Joseph who helped us, we're going to flip the script. They are now the enemy. Hey, everybody, from now on, the Hebrews are the enemy for no reason. That's biblical proof of how this actually happens. At some point, the people decide, let's come after the Jews.
Amazing. That's awesome. Because, and certainly, you said already, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, 100 years of the Jews are coming for the Temple Mount, 100 years. And just like that, what did they call Al-Aqsa flood? That's literally the invasion by Hamas's army into sovereign Israel. It's incredible. It's incredible. That's what's so amazing of this everything old is new again. I have people who I worked with closely who know me personally. Super worried. You know what they're worried about, Dumisani? Dual passport holders. Dual passport. All of a sudden, they've got the IDF harvesting organs in the rubble of Gaza. I mean, she brought up all that old stuff, and I thought, do you really not know that we've been hearing that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years? And I gotta say, because this dual passport thing is really getting on my nerves. There's 87 different countries that you can have dual citizenship, American and others, including Indonesia, Pakistan, Ukraine. But when they say I don't want any dual passport holders in Congress, we all know exactly which country they mean. One and one country only.
I tell people, Ilana, this is one of the ways that you can practically understand how Israel or Jews are being singled out. It's one of the ways that you can identify the irrationality. You use the thing about passport. I believe my daughter-in-law, who's a South African national, she now has her dual citizenship, right? Nobody's talking about South Africa. Nobody's talking about any of the nations, right? Israel, right? Same thing with the whole defense spending, right? Yes, Israel has a military relationship with the United States. A certain amount of money goes. They understand how that works. It's not just money that Israel gets. I tell people, you have to think of it like this. It's like Dumisani giving Ilana $1 million that she can only shop in the Dumisani store. Here you go, Ilana. Here's $1 million. Pick whatever you like. Like, it's really not giving her. She's going to choose from my store. So it's coming back to me, right? The people making it like bandits are the actual manufacturers, but that's a different thing, right? But here's the thing. Israel gives money to Egypt. Egypt gives money to Nigeria. All this is, but they'll say, somehow all of our foreign spending is for the Jews, right? That's what that actually becomes, right? Not to mention the fact that some of the places where we have this financial relationship, like Nigeria, where Boko Haram is slaughtering Christians by the tens of thousands, no discussion about that, right? We try to work with Sudan. Sudan is slaughtering Christians, right? No discussions. People, I say all the time, that's how you can kind of sniff out the anti-Semitic part of the discussion, right? We want to have an exclusive First, we're going to distort the real story about Israel. And then we're going to ignore any other thing that's even similar because it doesn't fit the narrative because we want to beat up on the Jews. So yeah, that's actually how people can understand it as well.
It's incredible. I saw one particularly vile platform post how Eric Clapton said that Israel's running the world. And I spit my drink, honestly. I'm like, we haven't even taken Hamas, which for all of their horrific, bestiality, we haven't even, it's 8.5 months later. We've got Hezbollah. The entire north is on fire. Don't get me started about the housing situation here. It's incredible. You've got anti-Semitism unlike it's been since the 1930s, but we run the world. We're doing a really, really bad job. A really bad job, and where's my paycheck?
Right. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I told my Jewish friends, I said, you all are the worst imperialists in the world. You've been in that little strip of land since 1948, since returning. You're still on that little strip of land, right? There should be Israeli flags posted all over Africa and the Middle East, right? And I tell them, why? Because the Jews aren't interested in running the world, right? They want to live in peace, right? But again, those types of libels, like Eric Clapton is talking about, like other people we talked about, even on the Christian right side of it, even the Tucker Carlsons, the Candace Owens, right? Once again, that's how you can snuff it out. Tucker Carlson wants to platform a Palestinian pastor from Bethlehem to talk about how Israel's being evil to Christians, right? First of all, that guy, he's a supporter of Hamas. He's part of the whole crisis, the checkpoint, all that Christian Palestinian nonsense. But here's the real evil, even beyond that, Eliana. You and I both know there is a Christian genocide happening in the region all over the place. But in Israel, no, Christians are free. They can actually go to worship like a Muslim, like anybody else, right? So you take your platform of millions to denigrate. As a Christian, you're a Christian and you're concerned about the plight of Christians. But you want to talk about Israel, not Nigeria, not Sudan, not Uganda, not actually where Christians are being slaughtered. We want to talk about Israel. I tell Christian leaders and pastors, I've told them this over the past several months, we will stand before God and give an account. We have to be informed. We have to understand. So you have a younger generation who are being introduced to the concept of Christian persecution, which is real, but they're being lied to and told that somehow it's Israel, not Iran, not China, not Pakistan, where they're beating. No, Israel is somehow coming against Christians. This is what we as pastors and as Christian leaders, though, where we have to talk about the whole truth thing. Our Bible tells us, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3 says, we must remember those that are in chains as if bound with them. In other words, our apostles told us we must remember those who are being persecuted for their faith in Jesus as if it was us, right? So that's our mandate to do as Christians, right? If we're not doing that, A, and then B, lying about what's going on with Christians in Israel, again, that's why I say we'll stand before God. We have that biblical mandate and responsibility, Ilana, to tell that truth, to tell them, yes, Christians are free in Israel. They are protected in Israel. The Christians that left Syria, crossing the border, trying to be free in Israel, all this happens while Christians in Syria and Iraq are being nailed to crosses at Easter, right? So we have to, for our own sake and our own morality, the own state of our churches, our mental wellness, and our spiritual strength, we have to be able to speak that truth to power, or what are we doing, right? If we're not gonna tell the truth, then we're actually being used as pawns for the sides of the lies of the deception.
So where do you think it's coming from? I mean, I'm just asking questions, right? But where do you think it's coming from with Tucker and Candace? It's good for business?
You know what, I can only surmise, and I've done this before, both in our writings and some of the platforms, because I don't know either of them personally, right? I can't speak for them, right? But what I've seen in the past, because like you said, none of this is new, right?
Mhm.
That what I call a spiritual deception, I would imagine that for people like them, and not just them, I use them because they're the biggest names, right? But they're the Christians who think just like them, right? Thank God it's not the majority, but there's a lot of them, right? I believe that they think that they are being moral. I believe that they believe that they are being spiritually, attuned to, if you want to use that. I believe that they're thinking that they're speaking truth to power. Now, again, I don't know them personally. I'm just saying that because when I hear, and this for years, them couch it in terms like they're concerned for their Christian brothers and sisters, right? When I hear that type of preface and then they go on about whatever Israel is doing, I think there's at least a part of them that believes that they are doing this on behalf of the Christian brothers and sisters. But I also believe that Israel bias is real, that Jewish bias, that anti-Jewish is real, and what it does, among other things, it short circuits your moral compass. It deceives you into thinking you're being a moral person, right? It's like we're talking about, I'm against, let's pick a human trafficking, but then you hear that the people who are being trafficked are people you don't like, and all of a sudden you're silent, right? I'm against rape against women, but it's Israeli women, but now nothing, right? I'm against misogyny, and I'm against violence of any kind. So you can't, okay, well, Hamas did X, Y, Z. Oh, are we really sure Hamas did that? Okay, so now we want to have a nuanced conversation about what is rape, right? What is abduction, right? For me, that comes from a place of hatred, right? Any other race hatred, any other ethnic hatred, any other religious hatred. And again, I want to be very, very clear here. The reason I said that first part about thinking that they are doing one thing, what is it? Yirmiyahu, what the prophet say? The heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can know it? See, the world says, "Oh, just trust your heart," but God says your heart is crap, right? Don't trust me, right? See, God, David said, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts," meaning that yes, I have propensity for good, absolutely, because I'm created in the image of God, but my default position will be selfishness, narcissism, right? I will fall. The Bible says the heart of the foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, right? It's not telling you, parents, that your child is an idiot. It's saying that your child will be inclined to do the wrong thing, which is why you have to be a parent, right? There's a reason why mommy and daddy have to say thank you, say please. No, don't do it that way. Why? Because your tasked with the responsibility of teaching that child right, righteousness, morality, although he's not going to just come into that by osmosis. I believe that the people who say, now that I'm concerned about Christians, but they're not concerned about Christians unless it's Israel. They're concerned about how women are treated unless they're Israeli women. I believe there's a deceitful part in that heart that's making them think they're being moral, right? They're actually really proud of themselves when in actuality, they're actually helping the side of darkness. They're actually, that type of person is running cover for Hamas. You are Hamas's PR manager, right? Hamas gets to do slash, burn, destroy, and you're going to stand up on your platform and go, hey, you know what? You got to understand that, Hamas is frustrated and everybody's got to like vent and everything. Like, wow, really? That's all you have to say about that? I believe that that person has been so deluded, right? And they've been so compromised morally that they can't actually apply the principles evenly. There's one law for the Jews and another one for everyone else. And until they're willing to see that, they're not going to see it any differently.
Yeah, and it's at the cost of exactly what's happening in Nigeria. I'm not so aware, but they actually have the ability
Yes, ma'am.
to bring change, to
Yes,
help
ma'am.
Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere that are actively being slaughtered. This is a horror. This is a horror for anybody. They have a platform. They say this is what they want, and they're not doing it. And it's a loss. It's a loss for everyone.
Right. So to your point, to that last point, I tell people often, I said this for years, when it comes to the Israel bias found, whether it's in the UN or international bodies or local governments or whatever, everything that we're discussing right now in that sense, where authorities are concerned, right, where people's positions are concerned. The first victims of that, of course, the Israelis, right? It's like what's happening right now, what's going on coming out of Lebanon and everything. And right after that, along with that, the victims, as you just mentioned, are the people around the world who are in situations where they're suffering genocide, bodily mutilation, rapes, tortures, all of those things, and no one knows and or cares, right? That's the other thing. The people that are paying are Christians in places like China. I remember, Ilana, several years ago, while I was still on staff with Christians United for Israel, we would have our summit in Washington, D.C. every summer. And people from all over the world, I mean, CUFI is a American organization, but followers from literally all from China, from Africa, literally, right? And there was one Chinese lady who came to one of the summits, 2016, 15, can't remember, right? And we had just a brief little meeting. There's thousands of people that are there. We had this small meeting of different ethnicities and everything. And they introduced her, who she was. She's part of the underground church of China, her faith is so important to her love for Jesus, and then her love for Israel and the Jewish people, that she deceived her government as to why she needed that visa to travel or whatever it is that she got to get to go to a Christian Zionist summit in Washington, D.C., and then is going to go back. She risked her life to join other Christian Zionists to stand with Israel. And I sat there going, my God, I got on a plane and flew from California, right? She came across the ocean knowing full well that if she was found out, that's what I'm talking about. So that commitment to truth, she was so compelled to raise her voice. Come on, Ilana. She didn't have to go to D.C. to a Christian Zionist conference, but she felt that God placed it on her heart to go. It so inspired everybody in the room, but it was never lost on me that she was sacrificing everything, right? So when the United Nations Human Rights Council and Amnesty International, and unfortunately the White House, right, traffics in those stupid talking points, right? Not only is it attacking Israel, people like that young lady who risked everything to stand with Israel and the Jewish people, it is ignoring what's going on there. When's the last time Joe Biden said anything about Xi Jinping and what's going on with the Christians in China? It's not going to happen, right? But, Israel needs to do this and Israel needs to do that, right? This is the danger because, and I'm for those that think I'm picking on Joe Biden, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, particularly since the time of the Iraq wars of the, what's that called? The back in the George Bush era, we call them the it was another term for it. I'm sorry, please. It's escaping me here. Where they're all the Saddam Hussein. There has been a wholesale slaughtering of Christians since the early 2000s, and neither administration, Republican or the Bush, Obama, No one has said anything about the Christians. So people think I'm beating up on Biden. This has been and okay, let me say this last thing. Let me all be controversial, right? The only president who has ever in the last 30 plus years mentioned anything about Christian persecution, Donald Trump. I don't care what you think about it. You can hate him or love him. I'm saying the only president who's ever said, he actually said to the then president of Nigeria, who was Muhammadu Buhari, why are you killing Christians? And people got mad at him. He's such a buffoon, right? He may not have done it the right way. He may not have. I'm saying he's the only president who's even said anything about what's going on with Christians, right? The only other people who are vocal about it are our Israeli friends, and I get calls all the time. Dumisani, your Christian brothers and sisters in Iraq and in Syria, they'll say to me, Dumisani, we see the work that you all are doing. We're so grateful. Thank God for you. But what's going on? Why don't Christians say more about what's going on with Christians in Lebanon? What's going on with Christians? And I tell them, we're Mashugna. You guys pray for us, right? When you dive in, pray for us that God would kind of help our little Christian brains be concerned instead of boycotting Israel, right? That kind of stuff. This is where we are. This is the truth that we have to stand on now, Ilana.
That's exactly right. And there's so many things, because, and that was also the underlying lie with Tucker's interview, was that Bethlehem has been under PA control, and the reason that there's so many fewer Christians is because, and exactly what you said, the attack on Christianity has been, you have Islam, which is a conquering religion, and it has all but made whatever you guys need a Judenrein, a word for that. That's what happens across the Middle East, in Lebanon. It's appalling. And it's, I appreciate so much what you're saying. And what it makes me feel like, and it was a point that you made earlier, Americans have we've, and I do still also consider myself American, because that's my ideal. That's my audacity to, demand self-determination, right? It's resilience. We have lost our resilience. Like, oh, you called me the wrong name. Oh, you know what I mean? Like, you hurt my feelings. And it's exactly this kind of thing where we have no concept of what it takes to get on an airplane. And Chet's not just a secret she had to keep now. She's got to keep that secret, the woman who came from China, forever, yes. And we have no sense of that. And I actually feel as well with Jews, we have that doubly so, American Jewry, because not only did we lose sort of that resilience along with Americans, but because we've had it so good in America, that let's be honest, that dog whistle of it's getting things are getting bad again, it's time to go, is slower to kick in.
Ilana, here's the thing. It was Yuri Bezmenov, who was a defected KGB agent. Many people may know who that is. If not, you guys can Google him. When he explained in one of his many interviews in the States about how the whole espionage thing actually worked, how the KGB information machine actually worked in America and other nations, like the Soviet propaganda about Israel being an apartheid state and all that kind of stuff. He said, he was saying that it's not what you Americans think, like in the movies. You watch your James Bond movies and everything. And he said, that's not what he said. That very little of the whole spy game is that. He says, what we have done, we have effectively changed your concept of reality to the degree that no one can come to any sensible conclusion. Like we're talking about what is a woman, what is a man. We've actually started this thing where we've changed language, we've changed perceptions, all of those things. This is the context in which Israel is the aggressor. Israel suffers a horrific attack on October the 7th, and less than 48 hours later on the streets of America, people are protesting Israel, right? There needs to be a ceasefire. Israel hadn't even fired yet, right? And there's ceasefire. And Israel needs it very quickly. There was some sympathy for the Israelis for a couple of minutes. Then boom, poor Hamas, poor Gazans, and this is the result of living in a society, like we said, in which truth is not the stabilizing force. Truth becomes relative, right? And again, the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic portion of it is the rocket fuel, right? It becomes this thing. Let me introduce one last little thing here. The whole controversy in the United States about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is just the child of affirmative action, which is another broader conversation. We could have it for a long time, but let me just suffice to say this, that any of those artificial measures of advancement were always doomed to fail. In the original civil rights movement, and my mom used to tell me about this when I was a little kid, it was never about equal outcomes. It was always about equal opportunity. The opportunity to have access and improve one's worth, right? It was always merit. That's what it was about, right? The whole time. Why am I bringing that up? It has most negatively impacted, well, two main groups, Jews and then also Asians for lots of different other reasons, right? But when it comes to the anti-Jewish part, built into this DEI mentality in the corporate world and on academia, is this latent anti-Semitism, right? That somehow it's those Jews, especially those quote white Jews, they're the supremacists, they are this and they are that, and they're the reason why people don't have a fair shake. And this is the scary part. People on the left and on the right. First, people on the right were all laughing at those woke people. Now you have the same thing. I'm watching conservatives, right, who are also jumping on this bandwagon. I say, wait. You just got through just completely lambasting them for all of the whole grievance politics and stuff. And you were cool until the issue of Jews came up. And now your part of the grievance politics is right. Oh, yeah. All those people of color blaming everything on white people. They're just being racist and everything. They just need to pull themselves out of their bootstraps, right? But now we're talking about the Jews. Oh, yeah. Well, that's different. Those Jews, they really are running everything, right? This is what has infected in terms of academia, some of the politics and everything, right? That's how you're getting some of that agreement in terms of left and right. This is, again, based on when there's not a reality or there's not a real truth that people are agreeing on, but they're agreeing on narrative, right? They're agreeing on propaganda. This is part of what's happening now. Our nation is suffering as a result of it.
Yes, I completely agree. And I actually, I'm gonna take it to a slight turn, because I think that the reason that we're in such profound danger, we the Jewish people, but of course, as you well understand, we're just the buffer. Meaning, the reason that we can't stop harping on the horrors of October 7th is the same reason we couldn't stop harping on the horrors of the Holocaust, which is not just that it's just endlessly shocking and gutting how specific and how particular is the strategy that goes into the tearing of the Jewish body apart.
Mm-hmm.
But what's also about it is that we harp on it so that the Gentiles of the world must confront it. You need to confront it. You need to look it in the eye. You need to look it in the face. You need to call it by name. Yes, and you need to understand that we are now, and we have always just been, a buffer. Mm-hmm. And there's only 15 million of us. Right. So you want to catch on really quickly. Yes, and what's so terrifying of this, and I've seen it repeated, conclusions that I've come to, and you see it, I'm sure you notice how certain ideas will sort of pop up across the board from different people across the world at the same time. So this idea of Esav and Ishmael, this idea of these two, everybody knows that the far left and the radical Islam is coming together. So that's also a spiritual ways to talk about it, like from Esav and Ishmael. And there's an incredible talk that I heard from a rabbi, I think Daniel Glatstein. I'll check that in just one moment. And he talks about how his grandfather survived Auschwitz. He was inside Auschwitz, and there was a moment where Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, we keep hearing from him, was arm in arm. He said it was like a lover's embrace with Goebbels. And they did some terrible things for sport. It made so that that was their fun, was that they would abuse these Jews, that they would never be fertile again. And he saw them standing there arm in arm. And he understood that this was the union of Ishmael and Esav. And that's when this comes together. This is no to guffaw at the ridiculousness of transing children and all types of things. This is when the worst terrors come. And I just want to read this. I've been thinking this. I know that you know what I'm talking about. I want to hear you say, I want to just read you a quote, which blew my mind. I'm sure you know, son of Hamas, Mossab, Yusuf, lost the middle name there.
Mhm.
But he wrote this the other day on Twitter, and I really doff my scarf to him because boy, did he nail it. So let's say it here. He says, the Middle East conflict is not a dispute over land, it's an ideological warfare. The Muslims have been waging holy war against the Jewish minority for 14 centuries. The Jewish people have denied the truth of a religious war against them, obviously to avoid a full-scale confrontation with the worldwide Muslim majority. The rest of the world must understand the true nature of this conflict and get united against continuous Islamic attempts to kill Jews. 100 years ago, the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire and the Nazis got united against the Jewish minority, which led eventually to the annihilation of 6 million Jews. History is repeating itself. What Hamas did on October 7th is the beginning of a new Islamic war against one of the most ancient ethnic minorities on earth. All religions and nations must get united against hatred of the Jewish people. We can't allow another Holocaust to happen to this genius nation. The false genocide and apartheid accusations against Israel are desperate attempts to justify worldwide Jewish hatred and ethnic cleansing.
Yep.
Drop your mic.
100%. 100%. Every once in a while, it's funny. I used to be on Facebook. People say, "Why are you following Facebook? What happened?" I lost my Facebook privileges. Mark Zuckerberg and the band kicked me out. Lots of different reasons. I say what I'm thinking. But what was funny was that when it finally happened, it was a picture of the Grand Mufti and Hitler sitting together. That famous one in Berlin. I think it's 1941. They're sitting there together. It's an iconic picture. Like it's a picture of it right here. You have the left and the right sitting together. The Nazis and then the Islamists coming together. What are they talking about? Killing the Jews, right? Killing the Jews in North Africa, the Middle East, killing the Jews in Europe, right? Because, like I tell people, Hitler understood that the Jews were diaspora people. He knew that they weren't just in Poland and in Germany. He knew they were in Yemen. He knew they were in Libya. Right? So he's working with and the Farhud in 1941, I believe it was, where actually that was crafted by the Grand Mufti. They're in Iraq. All these Jewish people are killed and kicked out. I have friends who are descendants from that. They either first and second generation, right? So yes, 100% what he said. That's exactly what's going on. And get back to the good news in a second. But we have to actually deal with truth, right? You have the machine of social media. Just again, I told people before, just think of if Joseph Goebbels had TikTok or Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we are now, right?
That's
And
right.
it is again, not just in terms of the populace itself, but it's in academia. Look at Harvard, look at Yale, look at, here these schools, and not just, and I tell people, not just in those Ivy League schools, from Ivy League to the community colleges, right? You have the same thing happening, the Jews, right? So this is the danger of it. And I think to your first point, as you were saying, that here is this growing hatred for Jews, particularly in the West, right? The intellectual First Nation, all this industrial the West is descending into this like never before, right? But again, it is an indication of what's coming for everyone. That when you have a Hamas encampment on NYU's campus from the east to the west coast, all the way to UCLA, and they are cheering the death of Jews, they are cheering Hamas, and now they're burning American flags. I say, people, if you don't, do you understand what the hell does burning an American flag have to do? That's their hatred for America, hatred for Israel. And oh, by the way, they're invading Christian spaces. They're going to churches. So the video that's been going viral of these radical Muslims in places like France and in places like, I believe, Brussels as well. If I'm not, it may be happening there in Brussels as well. And so you're having people, the largely immigrants, who are destroying churches, who are coming against Christian communities, right? Because we know what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews, right? So you have this playing out here, and the hatred for our Jewish brothers and sisters, particularly for us as Christians. We had better understand what's happening, because it's not just a hatred for it starts with the Jews, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, the late rabbi. It never stops with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews, right? But history has taught us this over and over again. Like I said, whether it's France, whether it's Belgium, whether it's UK. I remember there was it may have been Shlomo, it may have been Rashi. So there's one of the commentators, several of them, commenting once again. Let's go back to the scriptures in Exodus, right? I love understanding some of the wisdom of the sages, right? And not just the text, but what's actually been passed down from generation to generation, right? It says that the sages say that the magicians came to Pharaoh and they had been divining the stars, right? And they said, the Messiah is coming, the Messiah of the Hebrew people, right? That he's actually coming. The stars are telling it, right? And then later on in the commentary, it says that once Moses is born, the magicians come to Pharaoh again and they say, the Messiah has been born, but we cannot determine whether he's Hebrew or Egyptian, right? But we understand that he will meet his death in water. He'll meet an end in water, right? So the commentator, I believe it's Rashi, goes on to say, so that when Pharaoh commanded that the boys 2 years and younger be thrown in the Nile, I believe it was an age thing they throw the babies in the Nile. It no longer said just the Hebrews, but the Hebrews and the Egyptians. He says that's why it doesn't say throw the Hebrew babies in the Nile. It says throw the baby boys in the Nile. And the commentator, I believe it's Rashi, is saying that basically because he kind of wanted to cover his bases, right? Because they thought it was water. They didn't understand that it was what they were probably seeing was the waters of Meribah. Am I saying that right? That when that whole dispute with Moses and the people, but it had nothing to do with him dying because of water, right? Again, it's that amazing God element to it, Ilana. They were able to see just enough to get themselves in trouble, right? And it's almost like God let them do peekaboo just a little bit, right? So here they are, oh, the Hebrews, their deliverers coming. So he starts to kill everybody. And I tell people, I've told Christian audiences this for a while. That is the first instance of what starts with the Jews, never ends with the Jews. If you were an Egyptian and you saw the oppression of the Hebrews and you stayed silent, according to some of the sages, when it came for your child, no one was able to say anything. This was millennia before the Nazis even existed, right? That the people who were non-Hebrews, who are okay with the Hebrews being beaten, being killed, being made slaves, that's fine because it's just them, right? Then when it came for all of their children, that meant that they probably should have said something for the sake of humanity. Even if you don't like the Hebrews, right? Even if you don't like their God, the fact that they are being treated like vermin, the fact that they're being treated like less than human should make you stand up, because any society that descends into that, you have to know that it's coming for you as well. I don't care if you're black, if you're white, at some point you're the wrong religion, you're the wrong socioeconomic group. Any type of despotic regime that starts to target a certain people, history has already proven to us over and over again, it never stops with them. And our Jewish brothers and sisters are always the most classic example. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And so for those in America in particular, as we're watching what's happening with our Jewish brothers and sisters, it's already coming for churches. It's already coming for Christians. And so here I am waving a Palestinian flag, a Hezbollah flag, and not recognizing that Hamas and Hezbollah hate me too. Are you kidding me right now? This is not about just the Jews. This is what the West has been asleep at the wheel about, that somehow this is just about Israel and the Jewish people, and why we see what's going on in Europe right now. And unfortunately, it's coming for the United States as well.
That's right. Dumisani, you said this one time when we spoke, you were able to differentiate how there are some Christians who are our greatest allies, and then there are some who use the Christianity to be very anti.
Yes, ma'am.
Please explain how. How do you get
that? What you have is some of that is heart again. I won't go back all that to the spirit, heart, truth, that type of thing. Right. And then some of it as well, on top of that, everyone, is a certain amount of acculturation, a certain amount of teaching. What we call in the Christian realm replacement theology is just one set of thinking. It's a broader, it's a designation. The short definition of it is the belief that somehow that when the church came into being, right, particularly when there were Gentiles that are joining this Jewish movement, right, and it becomes more of later on a Roman type of interpretive thing, that somehow when the church came into being, that God somehow changed his mind, and the Jewish people were no longer the chosen. They were no longer the apple of his eye. It's the Christians. And not only was that the case, not only are the Jewish people no longer the chosen, but now it's the church's job to convert the Jews. It's the church's job to come against the Jews. That kind of mindset, right? So that lives on 2,000 years later, right? It's an old mindset, but it's still here. For Christians who subscribe to it, they often don't know what they're subscribing to. It, So the crazy thing that comes out of the Palestinian thing, that Jesus was a Palestinian, that kind of stuff, that it's not just ludicrous, right? But there's a specific thing that they're trying to do. They are trying to remove the Jewishness of Jesus, remove anything that would have any type of philo-Semitism within its faith as a Christian. They're trying to kill it, right? This is why, like a Tucker Carlson, is he part of that whole cabal? I don't know. All I know is that when you platform a Palestinian Christian who's going to just sit there and tell lies about Israel and never even actually deal with real Christian persecution, you are part of that cabal, whether you realize it, as is Candace Owens and so on and so forth, right? So what we're seeing, Ilana, is that that's not new. It's the newer version of it, but none of that is new. The belief that some Christians have held because of teachings from church fathers, right? Our great reformer is Martin Luther, right? And he did some really good things. But when it came to the Jewish people, he was the forerunner of the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust, right? He's the one who could kill them and destroy their synagogues, burn their Torahs. What? Right? And he did that because they rejected his preaching and teaching, right? They were friends, they were cool, but he tried to make them receive Jesus. Hey, yeah, you know what? We're cool being Jews. You keep that over there. He lost it, right? How dare you? That's the ultimate narcissism, right? So he then starts writing the Jews and their lies and da-da-da-da. That spirit is alive and well, right? There are Christians, unfortunately, who believe that if Jews don't believe in Jesus, then by God, whatever happens to them, Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever, that's because they don't believe in Jesus. And I've been hearing that for years, right? It's amazing. But those same groups that you're mentioning kill Christians. So what's their problem, right? If the Jews are being terrorized because they don't believe in Jesus, then why are the Christians being terrorized? I'm just trying to follow your train of thought, right? If based on what you're saying, Islamic terrorism is coming against Jews because they need Jesus, why is Islamic terrorism destroying Christians who have Jesus, right? Something's wrong with your thinking, right? But that's pretty standard fare. And what has to happen, I found, Ilana, is that for those Christians who get pulled into that space, they have to, if their hearts are open, be reminded that your faith would not exist if it weren't for the Torah. Your faith would not exist if it wasn't for Israel. Everything that you know and love and hold dear came from Israel and the Jewish people, that when God said to Abraham, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by you, you as a Christian are the first person in line. If it wasn't for Israel, you wouldn't even be able to call Jesus the Lion of the tribe of Judah if there was no Judah, right? So this is actually what Christians actually have to come to, that it is their faith, even as controversial as he is. And I know in some spares here, you have Paul in the book of Romans, who says from the Jewish people came the law, came the prophets, came the sages, he's actually telling Gentiles, you all need to be, here's Paul writing 2,000 years ago, telling Gentiles to not be dismissive of Jews. That's how old replacement theology actually is, right? So it's easy to happen, Ilana, in that Christian supremacism. I think that I know something that my Jewish friends don't, or I've ascended to a place that they haven't, and my job is to kind of stick my hand down there in the mud and pull them up. Yeah, that makes sense, and that if that's what you think about yourself. But if you understand with humility that we only have the scriptures because our Jewish brothers and sisters passed them down from generation to generation, there would be more respect, there would be more admiration, there'd be more love, and there would also be more of the defense when you see something like October the 7th. Now, let me say this last thing. I'm grateful that many Christians, the vast majority that I know, do understand that. They do love Israel, not for the purposes of conversion. They love Israel because of what the Bible actually says. They pray for the peace of Jerusalem because Psalm says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They prosper that love thee. They bless their children. They actually they sing about Jerusalem. They sing about Zion. These things are lodged in their hearts. And I'm grateful that most of the Christians that I know are like that. But yes, there's that other element that's there. So that's how you have that dichotomy. That's how you can have a group a room full of Christians, Ilana, and some of them believe, like I'm saying, oh yeah, Israel, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and the others, like, oh, those Jews, right? Unfortunately, that reality has been the case for the 2,000 years of the church's history.
It's incredibly powerful, what you just said, and I certainly understand this. There seems to be the need. It seems to be entirely comparable to, the guys in the office. There's some who need to delegitimize. I need to make you less, or I can live, and because that's why we speak the same language. I mean, I'm team. We get to all bring our piece to the party. Do you find people open? Do you find more people turning to your to the types of things that you've just described? What are you meeting out in the world with the world of BLM, with the world, with all of this other inversion on the social level?
So over the years, and now I have a chance to kind of address those types of questions over a decade, right? We can go back to like 2012 or 11, 12, and watching this thing, particularly the Christian Zionist or even anti-Zionist part of it. What is fascinating to me is that it's a parallel, or it's an extension of what we've been talking about, the spiritual part. I have found that, and I couldn't do it in terms of percentage, the vast majority of Christians in which we've had these kind of conversations, the biblical mandate to stand with Israel, whether or not the ancient Israel is the modern Israel that we see today, all those kind of controversies. I found that a huge percentage of people have never been Christians. I mean, had never been faced with that type of discussion before, right? The Jewishness of Jesus, the Jewishness of the scriptures, the fact that if it wasn't for a Hebrew root, that we wouldn't exist, right? Paul said you don't support the root supports you, that type of thing, right? The apostles, the Peters, actually quoting from the scriptures, but also quoting from sages, saying things that are not in the written text, but we know that it was passed down to him as a Jewish man. All these types of things. I have found that more and more Christians have never considered those things because they've never been presented in that way. But here's the other thing that I found, and I always, especially for my Jewish friends, I'm aware of who I'm talking to at this moment here. There is a growing number of Christians, and my wife and I have watched this anecdotally since the 90s, of Christians who want to know more about or who are embracing what we call the Hebrew roots of their faith. They're doing things like observing Shabbat. They're doing things like, celebrating Hanukkah, right? Some of them are celebrating Passover. And sometimes when I'm talking about Orthodox friends, well, that's the liberation. And I get it. I understand the controversy of a Gentile celebrating Passover. Please don't misunderstand me. I completely understand that. What you have sometimes, even in an awkward way, are Christians who in their own way are going, hey, wait a minute, right? And for many of them, it's causing them to have a larger heart for Israel and the Jewish people. Not in a replacement mindset, right? Now, mind you, I'm not talking about those who are going, we are the real Jews. No. I'm saying we have seen over the last 30 plus years, my wife and I, we've noticed more and more Christians, be they Catholics, right? Be they Baptists, all these different denominations, who are doing things like wanting to learn Hebrew, right? But wanting to travel to Israel, but not just like a safari in Kenya, but actually go to, as I told before, a racist who hates Africans goes to Kenya and safari. That's not going to make him like black people, right? It's a giraffe, it's a mountain, right? The same thing for an anti-Semitic Christian. Going to Israel is not going to help that person, right? If they're not going to connect to the land and the people, right? We have found that there's an increasing number of people wanting to go to Israel and wanting to know. Some of them have made friends with Jewish people. They've gone to Shabbat at their homes. We have seen that. It does our hearts good. Again, not in replacing them, but in saying, hey, wait a minute. I think I'm starting to get it now. Pastors who have a relationship with rabbis, right? And they have discussions around the scriptures and their shared love and that type. We've seen that more and more and more. I believe that's an indication. Well, okay, say this. Over the past several months, especially since October 7th, I have seen an increasing number of both Orthodox rabbis talking about the coming of Moshiach and Christian pastors talking about the return of Jesus, right? Now, granted, they're talking about the same event, but from two totally different perspectives. I actually get that, right? What I'm saying is that what's amazing is that both on the Christian side of it and as I'm watching our Jewish brothers and sisters, they're seeing this hatred for Jews being part of what the prophets said would happen, as in a worldwide hatred for Jews. The nations, why do the nations rage so furiously together, right? When you're talking about Zechariah, when you're talking about Jeremiah, you're seeing this. So I'm watching Orthodox rabbis teach out of the prophets, and they're explaining what's going on, the footsteps of Messiah. And I'm watching some Christian pastors say some of the same things. That, as a pastor, is fascinating to me, right? Do they disagree on some stuff? Oh, absolutely, right? But at the same time, what the principles that they're looking at, they are connecting the worldwide hatred for Israel and the Jews and the nations coming against the Jewish state as what the prophets said would happen. For me, Ilana, that's a positive thing in the sense that at least for us as Christians, we're going to the scriptures, right? And we're connecting modern Israel with this ancient connection to God's relationship with his people. So long answer to your question, we've been seeing that. We've been seeing more Christians at least wanting to know, right? I wanting to, all these long answers, I'm a preacher. I'm sorry. All the rabbis know I'm dealing with.
I love it.
So here's the thing, Ilana. I tell pastors all the time, whether you take a Hebrew course or not, they say, how should we approach some of this scripturally? And I'll encourage them and say, whether you do that, whether you even travel to Israel, you should go to Israel. Here's the thing. If you just start reading what our Jewish brothers and sisters call the Tanakh again, right? Now, don't just access the book of Malachi so you can preach about tithing, right? Don't just access Deuteronomy 28 so you can talk about how you're blessed in the cities and blessed in the field. And that's what we sing about the blessings. Yep, God is a blessing, but actually read all the 5 books of the Torah, right? Go and read all of Jeremiah. Read all of it. I found something as basic as that, Ilana, has been very, very powerful, right? All due respect, I'm not saying don't read the New Testament. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I'm not being a heretic in the church and saying that's not the Bible. Fine, yes, I'm saying, but take an opportunity. Walk through the entire book of Joel. It's a short book, but read the whole thing, right? And read it in context. Don't insert Christian theology. Just read it for a moment. Read what the prophet, when Jeremiah says that the sun, moon, and the stars are testimony to the fact of God's covenant with Israel. And as long as you have them, Israel will always be a nation. Read what the man is saying. Read he said, my covenant with it. When you read Jeremiah 29 and he's talking to the Jewish people in exile in Babylon, and then you get to verse 11 and said, I know the plans I have for you. Here's the thing. Don't just sing that verse and write and preach that verse. Read the whole thing. Start in Jeremiah 28. Come all the way to that part. And you see that God is affirming his covenant with Israel even while she's in exile. And he says, this is going to be an exile, and I'm going to bring you back. And the plans that I have for you are amazing. And my covenant with you is forever. I challenge the pastors, go to the scripture and actually read. It will be the beginning, if you needed it, of a revelation in your heart and your mind.
I'm deeply moved by what you're saying. And it's so obvious. I've never heard anybody say it. But my rabbi used to always say, you don't have a past, you can't have a future. What a beautiful thing to see where you started. And again, you have a tree with a trunk and you have many branches. Yes, and that's just awesome. Tell me more. Is this the type of thing that's in your book? Tell me about that. Tell me about your research.
Yes, ma'am. So Zionism in the Black Church, which is on our website, IBSI.org, and go to store. It's the second edition. The second edition was published in 2021. The first one was 7 years before that, 2014. And in the book, yes, these things are described. And it is, I sound like my promo thing, but it's true. It's politics, it's geopolitics, it's music, it's history, it's culture, all of these things, right? It is the story, in as much as we could tell it, of Israel and Africa, and then the Black and Jewish synergy in the United States. We said that Israel's oldest international relationship is with Ethiopia, when the Queen of Sheba traveled thousands of miles to visit Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. We call it the first Africa-Israel summit, right? So we have this connection to say everything that plays out in terms of Moses and the children of Israel happens in Egypt, happens in Africa, right? Sinai, Africa, all these things happen. So this is very much they're aware of what's going on here in the region, right? We didn't need, slave traders to come in the 18th and the 16th century to teach us about the Bible. We knew, right? There was always this understanding. Zora Neale Hurston, one of the writers of the Harlem Renaissance, talked about the universality of Moses, right? How Moses, there was awareness of Moses around the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So the book describes and discusses all of these things, Ilana: the biblical Israel, the modern state of Israel, Africa's relationship with Israel, the Black Jewish synergy, a generation before you have the Dr. Kings and the Joshua Heschels, you have the Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwalds in the early 1900s that's built the Rosenwald schools, changed the course of American history. You had, I mentioned this to a certain degree, these Jewish professors and intellectuals who are fleeing Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe. They come into the States and they're facing a lot of anti-Semitism from academic centers, but they wind up teaching the HBCUs, right? The Black colleges say, hey, and you have this famous picture of Albert Einstein standing in front of this all Black male class. He's teaching on a chalkboard and everything. This is how these peoples have been connected for such a long time, for the good of everyone, for the good of the world. And it also, among the many things we delve into are things like the Negro spirituals. I want to take a moment to give this one thing. People, I encourage you not read it because it's my book. But we try to explain these things, and we go all the way to the modern day, who the PLO was, why Yasser Arafat reached out to Jesse Jackson with the whole Louis Farrakhan, all of these things.
If you want to say anything about that, if you want to elaborate on that.
I will. So let me do this part first, because it's 6 chapters in the book. It's about 300 pages or so and everything, guys. And it something like that. I can't remember the pages, right? But I try to give that overview, and it explains not just that perspective, the great deal of Black American history, right? Again, there's a lot of pride that goes in that in terms of who we are as a people, what we endured, and how we're still here, right? Those parallels, right? The slavery, Jim Crow, all those things, but we still built families. Up until the 1960s, we were the most married ethnicity in the nation, right? Almost 80-something% of Black homes have mothers and fathers raising children. So you have to understand our journey, all these things that have. So one of the things, I'll give one quick example. I talk about the Negro spirituals, right? Go Down Moses. Some of our Jewish friends sing that during their Seder, right? Go, let my people go, right? Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, swing low, sweet chariot, Elijah rock, did my Lord deliver Daniel? We said most of the Negro spirituals actually set in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, right? They're not, many of them in the New Testament, yes, do a walk around Jerusalem just like John, who's the apostle, but most of those songs about Moses or about in the Old Testament, about the prophets and everything, right? Again, we would sing in our churches about Jerusalem and Zion all the time. In modern music, not so much, right? But Jerusalem songs, these are types of things that were always a part of the Black ethos when it came to church. But I'll give this one quick example because I'm talking about the spirituals. I write about it in my book, but I also, this friend I'm working with in New York, we do what's called a superheroes show. It's on YouTube. You can Google superhero show and put my name in, then you'll see. And one of the episodes is talking about famous African Americans in the Black history. And one of the episodes, the first or the second one, is about Lift Every Voice and Sing. It was written by James Weldon Johnson in 1899. James Weldon Johnson was a Black principal of a school in Florida. I think he got his teaching degree and everything. He may have graduated from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken. Right? This is the turn of the 20th century, right? And he writes this poem that most people know now. They associated with the song Lift Every Voice and Sing, or the Black national anthem, which has been very controversial over the last several years because places like the NFL, the NBA, they've been using this song for lots of different political reasons. And I won't get into all that now. The song is what I call the granddaddy of all the Negro spirituals, because like all of them, it is rooted in the Hebrew scriptures, right? And here are Booker T. Washington is believe who we coined the term Black national anthem or Negro national anthem. It was not named that to supersede America. It was never a political. The song is not political. The title of it is not political. Had nothing to do with those type of things. It was a celebration of God's faithfulness to Black people through slavery and what was in front of us of Jim Crow hadn't even really gotten started in the official sense yet. But we were saying that God has brought us to this place. I would encourage anybody to go ahead and Google Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I'm bringing it up for this specific reason. There's 3 stanzas. The last stanza says this, I'm quoting, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in thy path, we pray. Now I'm going to pause. I'm still quoting him. I'm going to pause for a second. They're not talking about some universal God. They're talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because the next part of the stanza says, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Those who know their Bibles know that that last line comes right out of Jeremiah 51. Flee Babylon. Babylon has made the world drunk with her wine. Why do the Black elders tell me and my generation and beyond to not forget God and get drunk with the wine of the world? Because it was God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who brought us out of bondage, delivered us, like the Jewish people, out of the bondage in Egypt, which is why we sung Go Down Moses in the first place, right? There's this identification. And here you have James Weldon Johnson in 1899 saying to Black Americans, we've come this far by faith. It's our faith in God. And if we hold to him, then we will be strong. It's like Moses telling the children of Israel, and when you get to the land and you live in houses that you did not build, you eat from vineyards that you did not plant, you drink from wells that you did not dig, be sure that you do not, when you've eaten and you have your full, do not forget me. I tell our Christian brothers and sisters, that's why our Jewish brothers and sisters say grace before and after the meal, right? Because it's when I'm getting fat and full and I'm patting my tummy that there's the danger I forget who filled my belly. Here you have Black elders in 1899. There's been no civil rights movement. There's still lynchings. Nothing is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But what are they saying? We've come this far because of our faith in God, because of our love for family. This is the Black ethos. This is one of the Negro spirituals. And I told people, Ilana, on the one hand, I don't appreciate the NFL and NBA using it for commercial purposes. But on the other hand, if they're going to sing the words of Jeremiah, fine, whatever. The whole world can watch the NBA All-Star game or the NFL Super Bowl, whatever. They're going to hear Black students get up and sing the song. You shouldn't be using them that way because you're just pimping my people. You're not really concerned about the Black community. But if that's how Hashem is going to use you hearing the words of the prophets, fine, whatever. Because it was a message to us as Black Americans not to hate America at all, right? It's saying here we have this opportunity to move forward because God did the miraculous. We've been slaves for 2 centuries. God has now brought our freedom. Black men fighting for their own freedom, like the movie Glory, that's all based on real stories. Black regiment there out of Massachusetts who actually helped turn the tide of the war. We knew that the only reason why we were able to do that was because of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same thing that happened with the Hebrews. That's one of the reasons why my book exists. Not just to delve into the history, but understand how we got here, right? What that actually means. And the truth that you and I were talking about in the beginning of this podcast, that has to be affirmed. It has to be held to, right? Because in the midst of all the craziness and the lies and the distortions, which all come from the enemy, right? In the midst of all of that, truth is the only thing that's going to stabilize you, right? So understanding, for example, as a Black American, the truth of my heritage, the truth of my history, how the scriptures were a stabilizing force, how our families were strong, how the church, how the scriptures were a part of who we were. It was our survival. It wasn't just some religious exercise. We were surrounded by enemies just like our Jewish brothers and sisters were. How did we not only survive but thrive? Because the God that we placed our trust in helped us, strengthened us. Gospel music set the tone for this United States. It was from my people that every form of American music flowed. Rock and roll, rhythm and blues, jazz, you name it. How were people who are so oppressed so creative? How did they set the tone like that? There's such a God presence in the midst of that. And we would sing about Zion in and out of church, right? Lauryn Hill, who unfortunately became an anti-Zionist, one of their hit songs on what I consider one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time, It's all about Jerusalem. She named her first child Zion. Zion is marching, marching. That wasn't happenstance. This was passed down from generation to generation. That's why that happened. These things are important to us as a people. Let me say this last thing since I'm on this soapbox, right? Therefore, when some of our people, when there's the exploitation of the anti-Zionism, this is why it has such a nefarious effect on us, right? I got to really be careful. Let me tell you something here. All right, here we go. I'm gonna let you learn a secret. Here's some inside baseball stuff. You ready? Some water because I'm yelling. Carl Scaressi is a nephrologist that's based there in Rambam. He actually practiced here. He made Aliyah, I'm not mistaken, the 90s, the 80s. I don't remember exactly, but he was a practicing physician here. Let me give a little bit of background. He worked in a clinic. I don't remember the city. It may be Boston. Carl, if I'm saying it wrong, please forgive me. It's been a while since we talked. And the majority of the patients were African American. And he saw a huge amount of kidney disease, right? A lot of people coming in with symptoms of what were clearly issues with their kidneys, right? Hypertension, high blood pressure, all of these things. And so he was curious about that, right? And he like the same way Julius Rosenwald did, he talked about his Jewishness, this thing where he sees this disparity, and there's something that's embedded in Torah in his heart. He's like going, I have to find out what this is, what is going on. And people were dismissing, oh, they eat the wrong kinds of foods and this, that, and the other. And definitely diet is part of the thing. But he determined after a long period of time when he returned to Israel, he's studying and determined that the high cases of kidney disease among the African-American community and some of the Latino community, because there's some of the shared heritage there in terms of DNA, was because of what's called the African sleep gene. And so now he, not just his team, but other teams in different parts of the world are working on a cure for African-American kidney disease. So we had heard about his work. This is years ago when the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel first got started, right? As a matter of fact, he was like the second person I interviewed, I believe. And so he was in the States for a round of discussions and everything. And someone introduced us. I still don't remember all those details, but we're sitting in a restaurant in LA. And Carl, my wife, and myself, and he's explaining to us the science and everything. He's doing it in layman terms. Everything. He said, okay, this in terms of the different blood types and DNA and any other. And so at some point, he says, we're talking about food. It may have been a question that my wife asked. I don't remember. And he talked about the preservatives and the unhealthy things, and especially American food. And as Americans, many who don't know, much of our food is so unhealthy. Much of our soil is so unhealthy. It's just so embedded, right? So anyway, so he's talking about these things that are really bad for everybody, bad for your heart, bad for your blood, all of those things. And then he makes the comment, I don't remember exact words, he says, but especially for African Americans. And that's when we paused, right? We said, okay, wait, say that part again. He said, yes. If you eat X, Y, Z, right? So it's bad for anybody, but for Black Americans, people of African descent, it's even more deadly. And my wife and I just paused. And it was at that point, and we've been talking about that for years. That was about 12, 13 years. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, right? And Ilana, one of the things that happened, several different things, and to make this shorter, because again, I can go on and on. It was very clear scientifically what the nephrologist was saying was that if people of African descent do this, now obviously we're talking about food and we're talking about a specific thing, right? But I'm just extrapolating from there. No one should eat these foods. These things people should avoid. But if you, Dumisani, you, Valerie, if you eat it, it's even worse for you, right? And there's two different ways to look at that. Oh my God, he's being racist. First of all, he's not even talking about ethnicity. He's saying science. This man is a man of science, right? He's a man of faith, right? He's a man of the Torah, right? But he's a man of science, like Rambam, right? The famous thing about Rambam, he's a medical doctor and he was his Torah scholar. And those two things combined made him such a formidable mind and art, right? And that's, to me, Carl Scaressi, he's saying the same thing as a medical doctor, as one who also believes in the prophets. And he's talking about these things, right? And we're saying that it is amazing because what we did in discussing that is saying that that means that there can be things also spiritually. That may not be good for anybody, but might be particularly bad for. And this is what this was. And some people may see me saying, "Oh, he's Meshuggah." Nope. If you look at it, if it's true in the scientific world, there may be a symbolic truth in the spiritual world, right? Meaning, among other things, I'll give you an example before I go to the Israel thing. Up until 1960, I said this before, I believe, the Black American community had the highest marriage rate in all of the United States of America, including white families, right? Some 80 something percent or close to that of children born in the United States, Black American families were born to husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, right? Why is that significant? Well, first of all, God is the one who built the family. Secondly, you fast forward to now, it's the opposite. Over 70% of Black children are born in homes where the mother and father, either there's no mother and father or they're not married to each other, right? This was the polar opposite 50 plus years ago, right? It was one of the reasons our marriage rates, our families, as I said before, those Negro spirituals and faith in God were the secret sauce, if you will, to how we not just survived, but thrived. How you got Black Wall Street, how you got Harlem Renaissance. How did you, not just people who survived, right? People who are actually building legacy, who are actually building wealth. People are actually homeowners and landowners. How are we able to do these things in a society that's clearly it's not supposed to be set up for you to be able to thrive? Not that it's not a constitutional republic and you can do these types of things. Yes, you can, but because of racism, because of discrimination, there's all these hurdles that not only were we clearing like Jesse Owens, right? Was it perfect? Absolutely, it wasn't perfect, right? Was a lot of bad lynchings? Absolutely. Nobody, and this is not a rose-colored glasses type of thing, but there was an issue. For those who I want to invite people to check out the interview with Peter Robinson of Uncommon Knowledge. He's part of the institute. I can't remember the name of it, with Thomas Sowell, but he interviewed 3 Black intellectuals: Glenn Laurie, Robert Woodson, and Ian Rowe. It's about 1.5 years ago, and they have a discussion about what, among many other things, what's called the century of growth and prosperity between the end of the Civil War, 1865, and the end of that civil rights legislation era, 1965. That here you had a Black American community in terms of wealth, medical doctors, all of these things, right? Again, not some sort of Cosby show like it didn't exist, right? But that was based on a reality that you had these professionals and these educators and all these things, right? And what's my point? It has occurred to me over the years, Ilana, that when other groups do the anti-Zionist from the river to the sea bile, it's not good for any of them. But if we engage in it, just like Dr. Scaresi was saying, I have noticed, we have receipts. I've watched this over and studied it over the decades. There's a reason why the PLO, Yasser Arafat, reached out to our community first, right? No one talks about, for example, now again, this is not a racialized thing. I'm just trying to be as honest as Dr. Scaresi was with us. When the New York Times ran the piece several months ago about 1,000 Black pastors have called for a ceasefire and they're demanding blah, blah, blah. You notice, I tell this to people all the time. First of all, that's the media gaslighting, because they're not telling you what Black pastors who stand with Israel are saying, right? They're not telling you that part. But notice something else. All due respect to all my Asian brothers and sisters in the body of Christ, right? All due respect to my Hispanic brothers and sisters in the church, right? The headline did not say 1,000 Hispanic pastors. It did not say 1,000 Filipino pastors. Okay? Right. Not because they're not relevant. No, why? Why? Because there's something about when Black leaders say something. This has been the case the whole time from the days of slavery, right? Here we are, a marginalized people, an oppressed people, and all of those things. But dang it, everybody wants to know what we're thinking, what we're saying, and they respond to us. I don't care, from hip hop to music to you name it, right? We are the most emulated, right? There's all this music. They would sell pop culture by taking it to Black kids first. This did not start with Michael Jordan wearing Nikes, right? This started long before then, right? It was amazing. And rock and roll was something that came out of our culture. But when white artists would do it, they would prefer Elvis singing the song instead of Chuck Berry. Why? Because of the racism. But the problem was that as talented as the white artists were, people wanted to see the black artists sing. They wanted to actually hear. They called Aretha Franklin the Queen of Soul, not just because she was the Queen of Soul. We created the genre. It came right out of the church. All these things came out of the church, and people would be fascinated by it, right? So this was amazing. When any of our leaders would engage in the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist bile, the effects on our community were always much more devastating than other communities. Just like Dr. Scaresi said that if we eat these foods, it's bad for everybody, but when you eat them, even more so, it's bad for everybody to be anti-Semitic and all this anti-Zionist and all this coming against Israel and Jewish people. But there's something about the unique relationship with that whole Africa, Israel, Queen of Sheba, Solomon, all of that, right? There's something about that when we do it, it has a more devastating effect. For those who are not convinced, I'll give you one more example. Black Lives Matter was formed in 2013 after the acquittal of the man who killed Trayvon Martin in Florida. By 2014, it was already a formidable force because what you had in 2014, people who remember 10 years ago, Mike Brown in Ferguson was killed. All the protests get started. Now there's organic protests because one of Mike Brown's friends was one of the main ones who were protesting what had happened to him. Black Lives Matter comes and swoops in like carpetbaggers, if you will, from outside. And next thing you know, you got from Ferguson to Palestine. What? Right. What in the world, right? And that was the point. Patrisse Cullors and the rest of them, trained Marxists, anti-Zionists, who then take what's actually going on and make it about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and start to raise tens of millions of dollars. By now, they've raised billions if you're going to count what we call the corporate pledges. Over these years, it has been a major grift. Millions and millions of dollars raised, and these communities that they're supposed to be raising them for, not only not improved, even worse. Look at Oakland, look at Ferguson, look at certain parts of Compton. They're even worse now. They stood on the dead bodies of these people, raised money to free Palestine, then bought themselves mansions, right? Bought themselves all kind of private security. They demonized white people and then moved into neighborhoods that were 98.9% white. This is exactly was the danger. So when I was quoting what James Weldon Johnson said in 1899 in the whole Lift Every Voice and Sing, lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. When our community, when leaders in our community played that grift game, it had a devastating impact on us. Even more so than other people. Why? I believe because other people would follow our lead. You can't even define civil rights without defining it through the Black and the Jewish community, right? You can't even define this whole education movement without going back to what Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald did. We set the tone for the world, right? So it's an example that when the example then becomes errant, it's almost like the impact on us is doubly so. That was one of the things that we learned in listening to Dr. Scaresi. He didn't make those connections. He was just talking about blood work and DNA. Okay. But my wife and I are sitting there going, okay, this doctor just said that if we do this, it harms us even more. And I'll say this last part, then I'll be done with that, Ilana. I shared this with sometimes with younger Black people. Black community, we were discussing this. Some of them were talking about it right now. I said, on the one hand, it's a heavy burden. On the other hand, it is a tremendous privilege. That it's like royalty. We used to tell all the time that royalty can't just go anywhere and do anything and just that royalty in a real sense, not somebody who's just full of themselves, but somebody who has the responsibility that has been handed down to them to be an example, right? I love the text in Deuteronomy. When God tells the children of Israel, I believe it's chapter 17, he gives them the prescriptions for having a king. He said, when you're desiring a king, he says, like the other nations have, it's amazing. He doesn't say, no way you don't have a king. He says, you can, if it follows this protocol. And then through Moses, he explains what your king will be: a lover of Torah. It's almost like he's describing a priest, right? He will not heap up wealth on himself. He won't take the ladies to be his handmaid. None of those things. In other words, all these other nations, God says to Israel, you see, they define king as the biggest, baddest, wealthiest. He gets to do what he wants. No, God said, no, your king will be a servant. He will love my word. He will make a copy of it. I go, my God. He said he's going to write a copy of the word. He said, this is what a king should be for you. This is what I want for you. This will be your Israel. I want you to model what a true monarchy is supposed to look like. Of course, we know that model is the actual king, the Adonai Melech, right? That we know that that's the model, but he's saying, here's what a leader is supposed to be. Black Americans have been given such a mantle of leadership. And it's such a, well, they say heavy is on the head is the one who wears the crown, right? And what happens is that when we set that example in a positive way, it's very, very powerful. And when any of our leaders set it in a negative way, it has devastating consequences for many, including in our own community. That was what we learned when we gleaned from what Dr. Squiresi said to us that day.
It's awesome. It's so deeply powerful, and it goes right back to your other points about learning Hebrew, about reading the Old Testament, about those roots. And it speaks, it's like we spoke with Francisco Gil White. You're talking about a model, trying to jam a round peg, was it square peg, round hole? Like, it just fits what you're saying, because the connection that's so obvious to you and it's so obvious to me is on such a deep soul level. You long for Zion. We long for Zion. Like, it's the base, and it's God. The whole idea of watching the breakdown in society, of government is your daddy now, because what keeps strength? It's family. It's God. It's these bigger than you entities that you devote yourselves to. And it's 100%, it's so clear. And I love how you just drive right through to the roots. Pastor Dumisani, you are doing so many things. You are not just sky is falling. You are moving and shaking. What are some of the activities? What are some of the things that you're doing, and how do we help? How do we get involved?
So for people, the best way to do it centrally is to go to the website, IBSI.org. IBSI.org, that's the website for our organization, Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. The links may be up there for the others, I think, I'm not sure. But you have to know that in the work that we do, whether it's advocacy, whether it's education, whether it's taking young people to Israel, to Africa, pastors, that type of thing, we also, in that vein, we try to be very, very meticulous about what we're doing, and as we're partnering with different organizations. One of those is called the African Jewish Alliance, right? And so this is among the other things that we're working on. I want to really emphasize this. You can go to that website as well, AfricanJewishAlliance.org. It was founded by our good friend, Dr. Charles Jacobs, who's done tremendous work. Some of you may recognize that name. He's been the modern day abolitionist, bringing awareness to the slavery in places like Sudan and places like Nigeria, actually buying back slaves. He received a humanitarian award from Coretta Scott King herself around 2003, 2004, shortly before her death. And so that organization draws the correlation between what is going on with our Israeli brothers and sisters and what's going on in Africa. In other words, we say it this way, Ilana, and October the 7th happens every week in Nigeria. It happens every week in Sudan. And when we say that, we're not being flippant. We're not in any way dismissing what happened on October 7th, that horrific massacre that sadly is still playing out, and that Hamas is still attacking, and Hezbollah is attacking from the north, and we see the ring of fire around Israel. We recognize this. But we recognize it also and call it for what it is. It is Islamic terrorism. It's not a broad sweep of Muslims. Obviously, there's Arab Muslims who serve in the IDF, right? This is not. There's been such the craziness when it comes to political correctness, which has really destroyed the West in so many different ways, right? That Hamas, which is a Islamic terrorist organization, right, as is Boko Haram, in Nigeria, bring back our girls into this Islamic terrorist organization, as is Hezbollah, as is Islamic Jihad, as is ISIS, and on and on and on. There is a mentality in which they are destroying lives. Christians, Jews, and other Muslims. Many Muslims are dying in those parts of the world as well. So for people who want to know more and see how they can be involved, we're actually hosting our first summit in a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C. for the African Jewish Alliance. I don't have all the details, but if you go on IBSI.org and then click on dates, you will see not only all of our events, but that one that's coming up in DC. Anyone who's in DC, or if you have family or friends in DC, the 25th and 26th, that's our anniversary. So my wife and I are going to be spending our anniversary at this summit, but we're looking forward to it. We're excited about it. And Ilana, we believe that this is one of the many things that are very important that are happening right now, telling both our government and then the world about this evil, right? I'll say something else in a second. But anyway, so that's one of the other things that we're doing. We work with other pro-Israel organizations throughout the country as well. And so, if people want to know more about it, they can go to IBSI.org. Of course, we're a nonprofit. If they want to help us in that way, they can do that as well. So yes, this is, and then also we're launching, this is unrelated, it's somewhat related. We're launching a radio show, so our family, we're working with some friends in New York City, and on Father's Day, Sunday, June the 16th, I'm starting a radio broadcast that's going to be in the metro area, but also podcasting on the internet, called Truth to Power with Dumisani Washington. That starts on, again, Sunday after this. And so whenever you listen to this podcast, if you listen to it later on, June the 16th. And in that one, we are going to be discussing and emphasizing all types of subjects, right? The marriage, family, home, Black history, Israel, Africa, lots of different topics and everything. So it's not completely related to IBSI, but again, we'll be doing that. So if people want to check that out and share that, they can do that as well.
Amazing. And you said there was another point you wanted to make. Were you?
So this is part of the thing. I want to say this with I'm a speak truth to power type of person. It's in my DNA from my parents. They were both my mom was more vocal than both my parents have passed away. My mom was more vocal. My dad, he was just as opinionated. He just loved of less words. So I kind of got a combination of both, especially from my mom's mouth. I'm giving you an example of Nigeria. Nigeria, over the last 2 decades, some 50,000 plus Christians have been slaughtered. 50,000. That's just a rough estimate. It's probably more than that. Hundreds of thousands displaced, just like our Israeli friends are internally displaced within Israel. Hundreds of thousands of displaced. That's not even mentioning like a Sudan where millions have been displaced, millions have been killed, right? So part of the issue that exists, Ilana, is that, as that old saying, when good men do nothing, the evil that persists, right? We as a government, as a nation, the United States of America, the strongest, most powerful, most influential. Yes, can we go be the world's police? No, we can't, right? But we do have a moral obligation to speak, because when we speak, other nations listen. At least they did. When the Biden administration came in, one of the first things that it did, other than flooding money to Hamas and flooding money to Palestinian Authority, people think that's a partisan thing, whatever. I can't really help you. Just the facts. If facts are partisan to you, I can't help you, right? They also took Nigeria off the list, the State Department list of nations in which religious freedoms are repressed. They took Nigeria off the list, right? So here's the thing. This is not me. Let me just say, Speaker Dumisani, I am not banging the gavel saying we need to send American troops to Nigeria. No, we need to. No, that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm not using my American voice for the purposes of let's go invade Nigeria, let's go invade Sudan. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have a moral obligation to, at the very least, speak truth to power, right? Yes. So when we not only not say anything about Christians, we're supposed to be a Christian nation, Ilana, just like you have a Jewish nation, we're supposed to be a Christian nation, right? Last I checked, we're a Christian nation. The fact that we don't care, not to mention the church leaders, because many of us don't say anything about it either, but then when we run cover for the Islamists by taking a nation off, that's our way of saying nothing to see here, ladies and gentlemen. No, everything is fine. Nigeria is fine. It's the same type of betrayal of Israel, right? You have Joe Biden, he gets up He says, oh, here's a new plan that Israel came up with of how to end the war. And Israel's like going, we did no such thing. We still have the hostages that are actually there, right? You have a situation in which our government, United States, is such a moral quagmire now, right? Has lost itself. And not only is not speaking truth to power, running cover for Hamas, running cover from the Iranian Republic, right? They're actually running cover for the communist nation, communist government of China, right? China, which is also flooding the United States with all kind of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic material, right? We are not only not combating it, we're actually giving cover to it. This is what I was saying. The reason I say I would pause so that no, the purpose of our summit in DC isn't to make it a political, those types of things. We're bringing awareness, but we're also very aware. I'll tell you this story. The first meeting that we had of some of the leaders, because the people who are part of the African Jewish Alliance, they're African nationals. Again, they're from Nigeria, they're from Sudan, they live here in the States. And some are from Mauritania. It's a growing alliance, right? And they're saying, we hear it, Israeli friends, we understand what you're going through. Come on, let's come together and tell the world what's actually going on with us, right? How the United Nations doesn't care about Israel or Africa, right? They ignore all of these things, right? So we sat there in a little restaurant, Ilana, and it still just grips me. Different ones spoke, they introduced themselves and everything. There's one young lady from Nigeria. And again, people, if you go to AfricanJewishAlliance.org, you'll see there's an organization called Leah that's associated with it. She's a young lady who was abducted by Boko Haram, refuses to become, they wanted her to renounce her Christianity, become a Muslim. She refuses, so they refuse to let her go. So she's been held captive for years because she refuses to renounce her faith, right? So the young lady who was sitting there, I can't remember her name, she's over that organization. And she introduced herself, told us her name, and then she obviously had prepared something to say and she got choked up. She couldn't. And Ilana, she just sat there and she said, Nigerians are scared. See, what had started in the northern part of the state is now all over. And Christians are dying, like I said, 5,000 to 6,000 a year, right? And they're sitting there. I guess they're going to be going back to Nigeria that next week, not knowing when their day is going to be their last, and also knowing that the world couldn't care any less. So when it was my turn to speak, and I shared in that, and I didn't want to make it political then either, I said to them, and I started talking about our nation's obligation, not just how we took them off the State Department list in Nigeria, how during the Obama administration, we ran cover for Boko Haram. We refused, Hillary Clinton's State Department refused to designate them as a terrorist organization, and they grew and grew and grew, right? They helped topple the government at that time because the president at that time was Goodluck Jonathan, who was a Zionist, who was pro-Israel, and then President Obama got involved. We're talking about election meddling.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you can Google it, people. Go to YouTube and Google Barack Obama Nigerian elections. He made election videos for Nigerians' elections, telling them to get out the vote. I go, wait, what? Why are you telling Nigerian, right? And I had Nigerians contacting me saying, Dumisani, we believe your State Department is helping pay money to Boko Haram. We believe, now again, they were concerned about what they were saying. Right? I'm not trying to start a rumor. I'm saying these are Nigerians contacting us, right? When I began to share that at the table, they all looked at me, their eyes got big, the Nigerians at the table. They looked at Charles, who's also there as well. They went, everything he says is absolutely right. They didn't know that this American was as aware, at least, of what was actually being said, and even some of the receipts that were actually there, like the meddling in the election type of thing, and they knew it. For them, Ilana, those Africans, whether they're in Sudan, whether in Nigeria, they know of the greatness of the United States of America. And they know how they've been betrayed. So when they watch Israel being betrayed, they're like, been there, done all of that. Yep, exactly. Yep, absolutely. Al-Shabaab, the other, or I can't remember the other one that's there in Sudan. Al-Shabaab is the one that's based in Somalia, but it kills Kenyans and everything like that. Oh, they're sitting there going, yep, all that. So when they watch Hamas and the billions of dollars that come from the United States and they're running cover and they're telling Israel to cease fire, but they say nothing to Hamas, our African brothers and sisters are going, yep. Yep.
Yep.
So, absolutely. Yep. Been there, done that. We've seen all of that. They're treating you just like they've been treating us for decades, right?
Yep.
This is what I was going to say to that. So for me, what happens is that sometimes bringing up these truths are uncomfortable for certain people. And like I said before already earlier in this podcast, I like a pastor, like at that point, I'm the pastor who's talking to the congregation, who loves them enough to not really care that they, you can squirm and you can, whatever like that. You can leave early, whatever, because I'm not going to stop telling you the truth. So much of what's happening here, Ilana, if the Biden administration doesn't flood the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, meaning UNRWA, with hundreds of millions of dollars right off the bat, it's a very good chance that on October 7th, doesn't happen, at least that way. What do you mean? We train those fighters. That money to give them paragliding that was American money. Those are American weapons. It's amazing how the military industrial complex is supposed to put people. It's amazing. Some people get angry at me with that, but I'm just, I got to speak truth to power. Yes, we fund both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We give hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to Palestinian terrorists, and then we make a big to-do about giving Israel military funding to defend themselves against the terrorists that we just gave money to. And we pat ourselves in the back, call about Israel high. That's not how that works. That's not how it works. It doesn't work for me to tell Ilana how much I love and appreciate her, and then I give terrorists who want to kill her money. I go, Ilana, don't worry. Here's some money for you too. Ilana would probably say, hey, Dumisani, could you not give them money? How about please stop funding the people who say they want to kill me and my family? And that's been going on for decades, right? These are the types of things that we speak to. And I don't know, you're asking me about how people can help. And now I'm on another riff. I don't mean to do that. But yes, that's what I was going to say about the whole African-Jewish alliance part of it. We're going to have to speak some uncomfortable truths, right? To actually get to the heart of the matter. Otherwise, we're all just singing Kumbaya, right? Well, let's all come on together and have it. That's great. We can feel good about it. Marches are cool, right? And statements of solidarity are cool, right? But if you're not going to actually deal with the root of the problem, you're not really doing anything other than making yourself feel good. And, you can make yourself go watch a movie, make yourself feel good. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that brings us back to really how we started off, which is, of course, the distortion of basic truths. So we made it taboo to call things what they are, and that's actually what you've demonstrated for us for this entire discussion is just simply, you don't have to put a lot of emotion to it. It could just be what it is. There are truths, and they have made it taboo to speak what is obviously true to everyone. And that is the first cog, in the wheel of getting us to this point of devastation. And what you said about Nigerians is a similar conversation that I had with Iranians. And it's that place that gives me a glimmer of hope. It's that we, the people, and it's incredible because now you were talking about really worldwide. We have a story, and our story is completely different than the ideological what coming out of our governments. And that's the voice that you're bringing. That's the voice of these podcasts. This is the whole point of this glorious internet, is to be able to bring those, and they're stacking up. And that is to me where the hope lies, is that this will tip. Because those of us who have lived through this, who are living it, who are saying, and I think people see it. They see what's happening on the streets. They see this is not the same. This is not what the brochure offered. This is not what I invested in.
Yes, ma'am.
Our gold standard is no more, and we deserve better.
I have many friends in the Persian Jewish community in LA. Some are journalists, Lisa Daftari, Carmel Malamed, and we've had this discussion many times that the Iranian people stand with Israel. By and large, it is a powerful testimony. The fact that the Ayatollahs from 1979 have attempted to indoctrinate the entire nation, not to mention the world, right? But the Iranian people have been able to see through the lies, see through the distortions, and they are supportive, as you already know, of Israel as a people. The majority of them stand with Israel. There are many Christians. The church is growing fastest in Iran. For those who didn't know, it's repressed in Iran, but Iranians are coming to faith in Jesus in Iran more than any other nation, right? And so you have a people who do love Israel, right? The Ayatollahs, it is a tremendous testimony. It's the same thing in South Africa. The ANC, the African National Congress, do not speak for the majority of Black South Africans, right? And again, like you said, that's the hope, right? That in the midst of all the corruption and the distortions on the terms of leadership, often there are people whose hearts are different, right? And whose voices obviously need to be heard. And that's a powerful hope, because now it's a matter of tapping into those voices and allowing them to speak, right? Allowing them to say what they need to say, which is why we're excited about the African Jewish Alliance. These are people coming together and really bringing voice to what's really, really happening on the ground.
What do you hope to see? What do you hope to see happen in America here? What's our goal?
Well, at that point, I'd have to answer it as not a pastor, not because it's not important, but because I want to get right to this part of it here, which would be, there would have to be, in the midst of all this, speaking truth and uncovering things, there would have to then be a change of course. So what I'm hoping, in answer to your question, Ilana, is that we will see, like in our education system, for example, real education, real thought, real discussion, real opportunity for everyone, right? Not just for elites who are manipulating what's going on and all of those types of things. And I have an opportunity. I can't speak to it specifically now, but I was talking with a Jewish leader who has an organization that, among other things, takes different people to Israel for some specific projects and everything. So I'm a part of that now. And we were both saying that when they go to the land, it's you see, right? You understand. So what I'm hoping, I can't say I'd see it, Ilana, to be honest, but what I'm hoping is that there's that level of openness, of learning, of teaching, of dialogue, right? That really, as Isaiah said in chapter 1, rebukes the oppressor and pleads for the cause of the widow, right? There's real, not the social justice warrior claptrap, right? But the actual, let's actually deal with what's broken and let's bring real healing to it. Let's actually bring real dialogue and understanding, and then real measures. I'm hoping, Ilana, that this next generation, I often tell our children's generation that our generation, by and large, failed you, right? I'm talking about in our nation, right? The America that we are living for you, for us, those who especially grew up in the 60s and 70s, is not the same America. Our responsibility, if the word of God says that one generation shall declare your works to another, we have not done that as a generation, right? One thing I'm hopeful of, Ilana, is that this younger generation sees that and is able to course correct, right? They're able to be patriotic in a positive sense, to love their country, right? Yeah. To appreciate the freedoms that are in their country, to deal with the flaws, right? Let's actually deal with what's wrong. Let's actually bring correction to things that need to be addressed. But let's do that under the banner of we appreciate the freedoms that are here, right? Because if part of the anti-Zionism that we see in the United States is a hatred for their own country. We hate America, we hate the freedom, right? So why would we love Israel if we hate America, right? If we're both supposed to be beacons of liberty and freedom and all those type of things, of course we wouldn't love and appreciate that. So what I see glimmers of, Ilana, is in the younger generation, they're willing to ask the questions that maybe others weren't willing to ask, right? They're willing to delve further. And I'll say his last person thing as a person of faith. For these younger Christians, my hope is that as they're seeing the ugliness of everything that's playing out right now, that ugliness serves as also, as I learned from my Jewish friend, the Sitra Akra, the other side, right? That in the midst of all the ugliness, they'll come to understand, which is why I spend so much time saying how things got here. This is how this got here. This got here by this way, that they'll be able to see the ugliness and say, okay, if we got here by doing all of these bad, neglecting types of things, maybe if we paid more attention to these things, as the prophet said, strengthen those things that remain, so then maybe we can turn this. That is my hope. If that were to happen, I could see families being mended. That sometimes ominous and powerful scripture in Eliyahu. With Malachi, when he says, "I will return the prophet Eliyahu, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, children back to the fathers." It's amazing to me that in the midst of that prophecy, which I know has a pashat, it has a specific meaning in terms of its time, but in a broader sense, God's talking about mending families, right? I'm going to fix the hearts of fathers and children so that they come together. So that reminds us that one of the signs of a broken community, a broken nation, is when the hearts of the fathers and the hearts of the children are turned against each other, when there's the division in the home, when there's a destruction of the family. As so goes the family, so goes the nation. I'm hopeful that we will see that coming together again, Ilana, that coming together in terms of faith. When I think of the Black American community, again, and how we were able to survive and thrive, knowing full well there was God. That one of the things that um, intrigues me about what James Weldon Johnson said in that "Lift Every Voice," I think I was telling you about, he quotes out of Jeremiah 51. Just like the prophets themselves, they would warn, they would preach, and then they would ultimately explain God's powerful love for Israel. It never changes, never fails. And that, as the old gospel song is based in Isaiah chapter 2, ain't gonna study war no more, right? All the nations shall come to Zion, right? There'll be this heal. There will be a cessation of war, right? There will be peace. This actually, that we're going to that place, right? I think about that, Ilana, and I said, I lament what has happened over these past 50, 60 years. But I remember that as James Weldon Johnson wrote those words from the prophet, right? It's a reminder that it doesn't have to remain that way, and that there is a path of healing. There is a path of restoration, right? There is a path of what this teshuvah, right? This real turning, right? That's, for me, I'm always looking for that, be it in my children's day, be it in my grandchildren's day. I believe that my grandsons will see a different Africa, a different Israel, in the sense of the all this ring of fire and all that. I mean, there's going to be a cessation of war, and Israel, of course, will live, as it says, Am Yisrael Chai. I believe that my grandsons will see more of a reflection of that. I think things are going to get worse before they get better. I honestly do. But I'm also hopeful that in these generations that are coming, we're going to see more life, right? And more people free, not less, right? More people released from all kinds of tyranny and not less. That's my hope, Ilana.
I feel like, as has been the theme throughout our discussion, which has, again, been also a very personal one in my own life, which is get back to the roots. It's a clear way. It sounds very cliche, but things have been such tremendous upheaval. But what do people tell you when you're incoherent, when you need clarity? You go for a walk. You go for a walk in nature. Honestly, it's like, let me touch base. Let me touch base to God. Let me touch base to a tree that is not confusing. Let me touch base. And that is really what you're saying. Just go back and touch base, and you'll find your way again. And I just can't think of anything that's more clear, more possible to take with both hands, and a direction forward. And as you may know, Pastor Dumisani, today is Yom Yerushalayim. Today is Jerusalem Day. And so as in a world that we know has no more coincidences, that we're speaking on this day, which is, of course, the heart of the world in Yerushalayim. And I hope that this is received really as the prayer that it's intended, for the people of integrity of the world, because we're here. And just because our voices have been drowned out, we are here. And you're coming to Israel in September. right?
That is the plan. We
I'm
don't have the
buying you
exact dates.
falafel, right?
Yes,
Falafel,
yeah, absolutely. Would love to
falafel,
do that.
shawarma, whichever you want.
Yes, I would love it. It sounds great to me. It sounds great to me, Ilana. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to close with this Isaiah 2. I mentioned it before, and I want to go back again. One of the most repeated gospel songs sung in the Black church for a couple of centuries was called Down by the Riverside, right? I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside and study war no more. I sang as a little kid. Plus, I was a musician, so I would play it and everything. And it wasn't until I got older, right, that I didn't realize until later that it's based on Isaiah chapter 2, right? The mountain of the Lord's house shall be exalted above every mountain, and all the nations shall flow to it. And they shall say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways. We will walk in his paths. For out from Zion goes forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will just judge for many peoples, decide for many nations. Swords shall be beaten into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. It was much later on I realized that when we would sing that in church, Black church, all the time. We were singing Isaiah 2. Study war no more, study war no. That wasn't just a made up. We would sing that in our churches. It was a hope. Yes, the ultimate hope is the world to come, absolutely. But it was also this hope in the midst of whatever was going on. I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside, right? There was this exclamation that in the midst of all the upheaval and all the negative and all the bad, God really is the, what our Jewish friend said, the Melech Olam, right? He's the king of the universe, right? And he really is completely in control. And he really is a God of righteousness, that even though we may suffer for a moment, he is a God of justice. He is a God of righteousness, that our hope is that good will always prevail. Evil and darkness will never reign forever. Oh, they might get an upper hand for a moment, but ultimately good will prevail. And so I just want to, that song, it's funny, the older you get, the more those things mean to you, right? That song, Study War No More, I'm down by the riverside. It is a reminder rooted in the prophets of God, of our hope and why we can sing, as they said in Psalm 137, the Lord's song in a strange land. How can we sing in a strange land, right? We can do it because our hope is not tied to the circumstances around us. Our hope is in the eternal God who sees what's going on. He's completely in control.
Amen. And people need to go and read your book because, and also we need to get you back on because there's a whole chapters on the connection between Jesse Jackson and the PLO and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and he was at a rabbinical assembly. So there's more to come. You can read the book and also come back. And I just say thank you. It's deeply, deeply encouraging in the most human way to hear you speak, to hear your integrity, and to be connected to it. So may your voice be heard far and wide. And only blessings and health, and happy anniversary to you and Valerie. And if you're in DC or even near, it's also my hometown, by the way, go and connect. This is good stuff. This is what it's about. This is about taking back our world because this is ours. We handed over the keys and now it's time to take them back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amen. Thank you, Ilana. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.